Humans are inherently doubtful and covetous beings. When confronted with perfection, their instinct is to seek out imperfections. In the absence of any, they often endeavor to fabricate them. The calamity that will be recounted today was observed by a vast audience, yet no one was able to assist the seemingly flawless girl who, as a result, became handicapped. Tsinghua University, often referred to as the Chinese Harvard, was hosting a distinguished performance in partnership with the Beijing Symphony Orchestra. This event held significant prominence. Gracefully attired pairs made their entrance into the majestic theater, men in impeccably cut black suits adorned with gleaming cufflinks, women in stunning full-length gowns clutching petite handbags. They exchanged smiles and engaged in polite conversations as they proceeded to their seats. Tsinghua University students, poised to showcase their talent that evening, faced immense pressure. One student, Zhu Ling, was confronting an especially daunting challenge. She was about to deliver a 6-minute solo, poised to be the defining 6 minutes of her life. The audience, potentially including professors, prospective future employers, and benefactors, key figures for her career prospects, heightened the stakes. Any error or mishap was not an option. She needed to captivate them and leave a lasting impression with her performance. Her goal was to immerse herself into the rhythm and embody the essence of the ancient Chinese musical instrument, the guqin. Revered as the instrument of the wise and favored by the literati and intellectuals, those who mastered it were invariably seen as genteel and perceptive. The guqin, a symbol of prestige, boasts a rich history. One of these venerable instruments from the Song dynasty fetched $22 million, ranking it among the most valuable. To soothe Ling, numerous friends positioned themselves near the stage, their anxiety nearly matching hers, having witnessed all she had endured over the past 2 months for this moment. Zhu Ling's entire existence, up to this point, had been devoted to these 6 minutes. She had almost jeopardized her well-being for this event. Her nerves were so frayed that in the 3 days preceding her solo, she scarcely consumed any food. Stress-induced stomach pains plagued her. Sleep was elusive, making it hard for her to keep her eyes open, and her sight was beginning to blur. Finally, Zhu Ling ascended the stage, greeted the audience with a bow, sat down, and commenced playing the guqin. In the initial moments, her friends were holding their breath, but soon the tension eased, and they found themselves enveloped in the music. Zhu Ling's stage presence that evening betrayed no sign of her nerves. She seemed to become one with the melody. Her hands glided effortlessly, coaxing out exquisite sounds that resonated throughout the theater. Some of her friends were even brought to tears. It appeared that Zhu Ling had channeled all her accumulated stress and anxiety of the past 2 months into her performance, transforming it into a form of emotional release. As the 6 minutes concluded, the audience burst into applause. Zhu Ling gave a deep bow, offered a smile, and exited the stage. Unbeknownst to her, her best friend was in the crowd, smiling broadly and clapping so vigorously that her hands turned red. Yet her expression also showed a hint of nervousness. That night, Zhu Ling opted out of the festivities to return home and rest. The dissipation of stress left her feeling utterly drained. In the shower, she began to wash her hair calmly. Glancing at her hand, she noticed a clump of hair. Passing her hand through her hair again, she felt her scalp and, with a sense of urgency, pulled back the shower curtain to dash to the mirror. Her reflection revealed an exhausted face and small, irregular bald spots, resembling the aftermath of a carelessly wielded razor. This was merely the onset. In the following weeks, Zhu Ling's condition would deteriorate, leaving her confined to a wheelchair, bereft of the ability to move, speak, or even control her facial muscles. She would transform from a highly promising Tsinghua University student into someone with the cognitive capacity of a 6-year-old child. This entire situation wasn't an illness, nor was it a genetic anomaly. Zhu Ling was undergoing something, and it was the doing of someone else. The likelihood of ordinary students gaining admission to Harvard was higher than to Tsinghua University, particularly for those native to China. The local acceptance rate stands at a mere 0.4%, making it more accessible for international students. The university operates on an annual budget of $5 billion. It's an institution where influential political figures' daughters and wealthy businessmen's sons receive their education. Each of them is exceptionally intelligent and well-educated, possessing high intellectual capacities. Nonetheless, the real challenge isn't just in securing admission to the university. It's surviving the intense competition and rivalry among the students. Some alumni have admitted that to remain at the forefront, they engaged in various manipulations, including betraying comrades, engaging in deceit, and stabbing others in the back, all driven by the unyielding competitive spirit fostered at this institution. In 1994, Zhu Ling was among the 31 chemistry undergraduates at Tsinghua University. She ranked in the top 3 of her cohort, which consisted of 20 males and 11 females. Zhu Ling was often regarded as the personification of excellence, the cream of the crop among students. Indeed, Zhu Ling was not only intelligent, but also tall and striking in appearance. Everyone foresaw a bright future for her, destined for significant accomplishments. Zhu Ling also had a charismatic and assured presence. Her arrival in the dormitory sparked envy among others. She had a knack for attracting a circle of friends and admirers, thanks to her warm demeanor towards others. She roamed the campus, attended lectures, diligently completed her assignments, and many marveled at her seemingly boundless energy. However, after a few months, a peculiar and unexplainable decline in Zhu Ling's condition began to be observed by all. She appeared less strained even during graduation week. Abruptly, Zhu Ling's vitality appeared to have vanished. She started arriving to class later than her peers and consistently appeared exhausted. In lectures, she would sit, perspiring heavily, as though she was overheating. Zhu Ling struggled to concentrate on the class content. She was plagued by severe stomach pain, leading many, including her instructors, to believe it was stress-related. Zhu Ling sought relief at the school clinic, requesting pain relievers, but they offered minimal respite. It began with minor lateness and escalated to Zhu Ling ceasing to attend classes entirely. Her friends, growing concerned, opted to visit her in her dormitory, which she shared with 3 other girls. They discovered her in bed, shivering and moaning in agony, with clumps of her dark hair scattered on the pillow. Alarmed, her classmates encouraged her to consult a physician, but Zhu Ling dismissed their concerns, insisting she was merely stressed and would return to her classes the next day, assuring everything would normalize. By the semester's end, the once impeccable Zhu Ling was unrecognizable. Her complexion had turned ghostly pale, her lips tinted a purplish shade. She resembled a specter haunting the campus. Her movements were sluggish, each step seemingly inflicting excruciating pain. Most of her hair had shed, leaving her nearly bald, compelling her to consistently wear something on her head for concealment. Occasionally, Zhu Ling's vision would blur, leading to temporary blindness for hours at a time. Various hypotheses about Zhu Ling's deteriorating condition spread across the campus. There were conjectures that her symptoms were due to a range of illnesses. Some thought it might be cancer or alopecia, known for causing hair loss, or perhaps an autoimmune disorder. Yet, more ominous speculations emerged among students. They linked Zhu Ling's decline to stress stemming from a dispute with her close friend, Sunny. The change in Zhu Ling seemed to coincide with their falling out. After Zhu Ling missed an orchestra rehearsal for a challenging piece, Sunny falsely told the instructor that Zhu Ling had skipped because she felt too skilled, implying the others needed to reach her level first. The realization of such maliciousness in the real world was a tough pill for Zhu Ling to swallow. Others in the university had entirely different takes. Being a chemistry student, some suggested Zhu Ling was engaged in clandestine experiments, aiming to make a breakthrough. But would an overly driven student risk harming herself? Bei Jizhen, a peer from Peking University and Zhu Ling's friend since middle school, decided to visit her in the hospital, armed with a fruit basket. However, upon entering her hospital room, Bei was shocked. His immediate reaction was to flee, not out of fear of infection or unkindness, but from the shock of seeing his classmate in such a dire state. He couldn't fathom how a vibrant 20-year-old could transform into a mere shadow of herself so rapidly. What illness could rob Zhu Ling of everything she had strived for? The medical team was baffled by her condition. Just months before, Zhu Ling was in peak health, but now she lay there, barely clothed, almost hairless, hooked up to multiple machines, with a tube protruding from her nose, her mouth agape in a silent cry, her body convulsing, her face partially paralyzed, and her eyes wide and desperate, as though pleading for salvation. The sight was harrowing. Even the slightest touch brought her excruciating pain and provoked more erratic movements. It appeared that even the fabric of her hospital gown was torturing her. Bei sensed his friend's silent plea for help. He read the unspoken message in her eyes, a look he'd never forget. So, he did what he could. He started to inquire, seeking answers. Alongside Zhu Ling's parents, Beiji Zhen probed the doctors for her diagnosis, but they were perplexed. Delving deeper into the onset of Zhu Ling's illness, her parents recounted that initially, the symptoms appeared benign. About a month or two earlier, Zhu Ling experienced stomach aches resembling spasms, which would come and go unpredictably. Within a week, the pain intensified to the point where it forced her to bend over in agony. She would often lay on the ground, curled up in a fetal position. Her initial remedy involved consuming copious amounts of Chinese herbal tea. Yet, the pain escalated, eventually causing her to lose consciousness. Zhu Ling, burdened by her demanding university schedule, delayed seeking medical attention, hoping the symptoms would subside. Then, her vision started to fail intermittently, first blurring, then completely vanishing for hours. Subsequently, her hair began to fall out, an especially traumatic symptom for any young woman. The situation deteriorated, leading to her hospitalization just days before Christmas, her first time in hospital care. During that month, her parents remained steadfast by her side as she received treatment. The medical team tested her for arsenic and mercury poisoning, but the results showed nothing abnormal. Intriguingly, a doctor from a different hospital, recalling a similar poisoning case from the 1960s, suggested the possibility of thallium poisoning. However, Zhu Ling denied any exposure to thallium in her studies. The hospital reached out to Tsinghua University to investigate which chemical substances Zhu Ling, in her capacity as a chemistry student, might have encountered. Despite this inquiry, her medical records revealed no exposure to chemicals that could trigger such symptoms. This left her condition an enigma to the medical staff. Remarkably, after a month, Zhu Ling's health appeared to improve, and she requested permission to resume her studies. She was eager to sit for her exams, anxious not to waste the entire semester. Her parents, however, were adamantly opposed to her returning to the university, fearing that stress was the underlying cause of her illness. Yet, Zhu Ling feigned a significant recovery and went back to her classes in February. Unfortunately, by March, her condition had deteriorated dramatically, resulting in her readmission to the hospital, this time so debilitated, she couldn't even speak. Beiji Zhen, disillusioned with the local medical community's inability to provide answers, took initiative. He reached out to medical experts not just in China, but globally. Zhu Ling's symptoms were translated into various languages, and he posted these on specialized medical forums online. In less than half an hour, he received his initial response. Over the next few days, around 2,000 emails poured in from 18 different countries. The respondents weren't mere internet users. Many were affiliated with national medical institutions and specialized in toxicology. The consensus among almost all of them was alarming: thallium. The symptoms pointed to a deliberate, methodical attempt to poison Zhu Ling, designed to inflict slow, excruciating agony. Thallium, a dense and highly poisonous metal, was once used in rat poisons but has been banned in major countries, including China and the USA. In the early 20th century, it was employed as a lice treatment, known to cause hair loss. Its array of symptoms is so vast that it often leads to misdiagnosis by doctors, and its detection is usually alarmingly delayed. Thallium doesn't leave visible marks like bruises or wounds, making it harder to spot. The poisoning unfolds in stages: initial stomach discomfort, escalating to severe pain, then trembling, headaches, insomnia, and temporary blindness. Subsequently, the victim experiences intense skin pain, akin to severe burns, where even the slightest touch feels excruciating. Clothing and bed linens become sources of torment. The final stage involves neurological symptoms, including involuntary motor disturbances, seizures, and partial or complete paralysis, culminating in cognitive decline and mental impairment. Tragically, in Zhu Ling's case, this meant a regression from a top student at China's most prestigious university to possessing the mental capacities of a 6-year-old child. Beiji Zhen, in collaboration with Zhu Ling's parents, sifted through the multitude of emails and promptly conveyed their findings to Zhu Ling's medical team. Yet, the doctors were skeptical of the diagnosis posited by online contributors. They insisted that without specific tests, detecting thallium in the body was not feasible. Testing for thallium required sending the patient's blood to a lab equipped for such analysis. Additionally, they noted that thallium is a rare, tightly controlled substance, not easily obtainable. The doctors also pointed out that, theoretically, if Zhu Ling's affliction was indeed thallium poisoning, an antidote would likely be ineffective at this advanced stage of the disease. This revelation left Zhu Ling's family and friends in a state of shock. The pressing question then became, who would want to harm Zhu Ling? A hypothesis emerged that the intended targets might have been her parents, given their high-profile occupations. Her father was a senior engineer at the National Agency, a position that could involve sensitive information, and her mother was an engineer at a prominent Chinese company. However, this line of inquiry reached a dead end. The primary task was to determine how the poison entered Zhu Ling's system, especially since no one else on campus exhibited similar symptoms. This ruled out the possibility of thallium vapors, suggesting that Zhu Ling either ingested or came into direct contact with the substance. Meanwhile, during Zhu Lin's hospitalization, her personal items were mysteriously stolen from her dormitory. The stolen items included her shampoo, contact lens case, lipstick, bath soap, and even her water glass. Intriguingly, the perpetrator seemed solely interested in Zhu Ling's possessions, marking a bizarre and unprecedented incident in the dormitory of such a prestigious university. With no surveillance cameras on campus at that time, an investigation was imperative. As students were housed in gender-specific rooms, access to the women's dormitory was restricted to current female students of Tsinghua University. Neither alumni, graduate students, nor professors had entry to the living quarters of over 100 young female students. The police initiated a thorough investigation into over 20 vendors known to supply thallium, a substance still utilized in manufacturing optical lenses, electronics, and other products. Scrutinizing the procurement records, they learned that one supplier had furnished thallium to Tsinghua University's chemistry department for research purposes. The inquiry revealed that only a select group within the university had access to this compound: 2 professors, 3 graduate students, and 2 senior undergraduates. Consequently, the perpetrator likely had a role in thallium-based experiments and had the opportunity to take personal items from Zhu Ling's room. As the investigation progressed, the professors and graduate students were quickly excluded as suspects, given their lack of access to the women's dormitory. This narrowed the focus to the 2 senior students, 1 male and 1 female. Since the male student couldn't have entered the female residence area, suspicion fell on the female student. Astonishingly, this student was none other than Sun Wei, also known as Sunny, who was not only Zhu Ling's best friend and roommate, but now the prime suspect in her attempted murder. The situation posed a baffling question. Why would Sunny, with a bright future ahead, risk everything in such a grave manner? The shared acquaintances of the young women mentioned that Zhu Ling had recently triumphed over Sunny in the student elections. Sunny was not known for tolerating defeat gracefully. She possessed a somewhat argumentative nature and had deceived her closest companion on several occasions. As Zhu Ling advanced and received greater acclaim, Sun Wei grew progressively more agitated. Zhu Ling's individual performance at the Beijing Philharmonic served as a catalyst for tension in their relationship. Zhu Ling was attractive, highly skilled, and esteemed not just by her peers, but also by faculty members. This probably fueled Sunny's jealousy. Sun Wei was questioned for 8 hours straight before her parents took her home. Her family was influential at Tsinghua University, with her father being a key figure in the Democratic Revolutionary Committee, and her grandfather a former vice chairman. Most of her relatives held government or academic positions at top state universities. Consequently, Zhu Ling's case remained unresolved. Sun Wei maintained her innocence, claiming the police had absolved her of suspicion. Nevertheless, she legally changed her name and birth date, married an American, and moved to the US, living without constraints. Meanwhile, Ling's diagnosis came too late. It was ultimately confirmed that thallium caused her mysterious illness. By the time it was detected, the thallium levels in her body were extraordinarily high. The antidote, Prussian blue, was ineffective due to the advanced stage of poisoning. Ling was declared permanently disabled, with irreversible nerve damage. She now has a child's mental capacity, facial paralysis, and is bound to a wheelchair. Later, Ling's family received $14,000 from the hospital for misdiagnosis and mishandling. The case's closure by the police, done quietly without notifying the family, added to the tragedy and suspicions. Zhu Ling lived to be 50 years old and died. Her parents were glad that in this state she could live so long. But the criminal was never punished. In the courtroom, there's no absolute truth, merely your interpretation of occurrences against theirs. That's the mechanism of the legal system. The issue isn't about what's just and equitable, but about presenting the most persuasive narrative. This is a line from the television show How to Get Away with Murder. In December 2018, a group of university peers took 20-year-old Sandu Dia to the emergency room. He was unconscious, notably pale, and his skin was cold, unresponsive to any stimuli, leaving the doctors perplexed. He was a fit, active young adult without any history of illness. Yet there he was, lying with a body temperature of merely 27 degrees Celsius in a comatose state. The medical examinations revealed that he had hypernatremia, a critically high level of sodium in his system. Typically, an adult ingests 5 grams of salt daily, equating to about 2 grams of sodium internally. Sandu, however, had 160 grams of sodium in his body, surpassing the 2-month average intake for an individual. The medical team questioned these supposed university friends about what had transpired with Sandu, inquiring about his activities the previous night. However, they simply shrugged, averted their gaze, and feigned ignorance about their fellow students' condition. Clearly, something was amiss here. Despite the relentless efforts of the medical professionals to save him, 20-year-old Sandu Dia succumbed to multi-organ failure, a condition where his body's vital systems ceased functioning. The autopsy revealed startling findings. The pathologist examined the contents of the young man's stomach to understand the cause of the sudden demise of a seemingly healthy university student. To the doctor's astonishment and dismay, he discovered an absence of food and water over the past 2 days. Instead, the stomach contained unusual items like aquarium goldfish, heads of mice, and entire heads of eels. This indicated that Sandu had endured horrific experiences before his death. The case of Sandu Dia garnered immense attention from online communities and media, rapidly becoming a topic of international discussion. Conversations erupted about universities concealing the shocking misdeeds of their students and the impunity enjoyed by offspring of affluent families. This situation brought particular focus to a student fraternity known as Remorse. Established over 7 decades ago, its symbol was a Flemish lion. This secret fraternity was composed solely of male students majoring in law, engineering, and business. With around 30 active members, mostly hailing from prominent families, Remorse stood as one of the most coveted groups at the esteemed Catholic University of Leuven in Belgium. Almost every student aspired to join this exclusive brotherhood. Annually, they admitted merely 2 or 3 newcomers. Abundant rumors swirled around the fraternity, heightening its allure and rendering it even more enigmatic and elusive. It represented a sort of student aristocracy with significant clout and sway within that educational institution. In the meantime, the student fraternity Remorse resumed its activities. They concocted a unique selection of items for their annual initiation tradition for new members. This initiation menu included starters such as grasshoppers and cockroaches, followed by a main course featuring live mice and fish. The dessert was a combination of coffee paired with an illicit substance. A disconcerting image showcasing the fraternity's initiation ceremony was circulated. In the photo, the principal members of the group were attired in warm outerwear like coats and cloaks, while 4 initiates were subjected to the challenges on their knees. In a startling display, one initiate had a pistol directed at his head, and another faced the barrel of a rifle. This photograph raised numerous questions. What other types of ceremonies did this clandestine group conduct? What were the exact happenings within the fraternity's walls? Considering the backgrounds of many members' parents, politicians, lawyers, distinguished doctors, and business leaders, what lengths would they go to shield their offspring if a truly grave incident occurred? Sandu Dia wasn't actually aspiring to join the Remorse Brotherhood. Born in Belgium, he was acutely aware of his fortunate circumstances. Sandu's father, hailing from Senegal, had sought asylum in another nation a few years prior to Sandu's birth. Like many fathers who are immigrants, he sacrificed a great deal to ensure his 2 sons could lead a respectable life. He knew that, because of their skin color, his children would have to work doubly hard to gain the same respect and career opportunities as native Belgians. Mr. Dia, Sandu's father, toiled long hours at a factory, spent nights mastering the local language, and either found or forewent sleep to assist his sons with their schoolwork. His sole aspiration was for his sons to achieve success in life. From an early age, Sanda was conscious about his future. He realized that success wouldn't come easily. It would require persistent hard work. Since kindergarten, Sanda had a close friend named Fairy. Living a mere 5-minute walk from one another, they were inseparable. They shared passions like biking, manga, and dreams of attending university, securing good jobs, saving money, and eventually relocating to Japan. They even made a pinky promise to remain lifelong best friends and one day travel to the land of the rising sun together. However, Sanda was never fated to see the birthplace of manga and anime. Beyond Fairy, he had numerous friends. As a teenager, Sanda excelled effortlessly in everything he tried. Whether it was solving complex mathematical problems or playing football for the first time, he amazed his friends with his natural talent. Though people often envy such gifted individuals, Sanda was beloved for his charisma and approachability, his knack for conversation, and his ability to connect with everyone. This natural charm and openness made it easy for him to make friends. After completing high school, Sanda Dia enrolled at the University of Leuven, becoming the first in his family to attend such a distinguished higher education institution. This achievement filled his father with immense pride, surpassing any dream he had ever envisioned. Although the university was just a 30-minute drive from his home, Sanda opted to stay in a dormitory. He selected civil engineering as his major, dedicating himself from the outset to earning a master's degree in the field. Sanda, who appeared wise beyond his years, was driven by a desire to make his father proud. His ambition was to graduate, secure a well-paying job, and enable his father to retire, repaying the sacrifices made for his children's future. By 2018, Dia was in his third year of the 5-year program. He was already focused on securing employment post-graduation, so he steered clear of the party scene, concentrating instead on finding a lucrative job to support his family and pay bills. Aware of the potential challenges his skin color might present in landing a desirable position in a predominantly European, tightly knit industry, Sanda was under no illusion about the difficulty of his task. Armed with high academic achievements, interpersonal skills, and unwavering diligence, he recognized the importance of establishing vital connections. This realization led him to consider joining the Royce Brotherhood, a group synonymous with prestige, social networking, exclusivity, and the crucial connections needed for his career. In a world where not just merit, but also influential connections are highly valued, this seemed like a strategic move. Many members of the Royce Brotherhood hailed from well-known families, and Sanda's decision to apply surprised his friends, except for his older brother who saw the potential career benefits of such societies. His childhood friend Fairy, who believed in Sanda's natural sociability and friendliness, was initially doubtful of these fraternities and even tried to discourage Sanda from what he saw as a hazardous step. If only Fairy had known the tragic outcome that would befall Sanda, he would never have ceased his efforts to dissuade him. For Dia, the decision to join Royce wasn't made on a whim. He carefully considered the advantages and disadvantages before deciding to go ahead, with only 2 years remaining in his program. In 2018, Sanda was among the 10 students who successfully navigated the stringent selection process of Royce. From these 10, only 3, including Sanda, advanced to the final initiation stage. The initial phase involved the fraternity's permanent members filtering out candidates who didn't align with their interests, character, or communication styles. Now narrowed down to 3, the real ordeal commenced. A grueling 2 months of evaluation by the elite student group, culminating in an extensive initiation ceremony spanning 2 to 3 days. During this period, the new recruits were relentlessly subjected to sophisticated ridicule, continuously, without breaks, completely at the mercy of the fraternity's members. Sanda was aware of the harsh trials that lay ahead. He had heard tales of the brutal initiation rites. Nonetheless, he was willing to endure all the discomfort and repulsive challenges for a promising future, just like the other 2 candidates. Dia understood the process would be tough, involving mockery and pushing them to their limits. However, no one anticipates risking their life in such situations. Sanda had discussed this with a campus friend, a member of a different fraternity, who was oblivious to the specifics of Royce's initiation practices. This friend portrayed the initiation as a mere test of physical stamina, commitment to future fraternity brothers, and discipline. Although unpleasant, he believed it was a necessary and ultimately worthwhile experience. Sanda found the mandatory gatherings intolerable, especially since he was compelled to consume excessive amounts of alcohol. More distressingly, as a kind of initiation, he was required to drink the urine of the fraternity members. He, along with the other novices, were relentlessly exposed to verbal and psychological torment. However, Dia faced the most severe hardships. He was derided for his skin tone. In October 2018, a few months before the concluding ritual, the Brotherhood organized a significant event at the Student Union building. The aspirants were made to meal while the established members of RUS alternated in forcing them to gulp down potent spirits, or several liters of beer continuously. Naturally, after ingesting such a volume of alcohol, the novices were barely able to stand, yet they were still tasked with cleaning the venue. In their disoriented state, they staggered around the floor, mopping up their own and others' regurgitation. That evening, all 3 novices were obliged to clean, but the brothers concocted a different plan. They determined that Sanda alone should tidy up after the celebration because, historically, those with dark skin served the whites. This was a harsh declaration, but Dia felt powerless at that moment as he was resolute in attaining his objective. He was aware that this situation would eventually conclude. A representative of the student association attempted to reprimand the young men for their remarks. But what could he possibly do against 20 wealthy, noble, influential, and pampered youths? They were unafraid of anyone and conducted these acts openly, without any sense of embarrassment, as the fraternity members deemed themselves superior to all. They simply warned the staff member not to meddle in their affairs. Sanda endeavored earnestly to gain acceptance, considering his future prospects. But at just 20 years of age, he was essentially still naive. Despite this dreadful event, Dia persisted in attending the fraternity gatherings. Some might question why Dia continued to seek camaraderie with these individuals. His reasons were multifaceted. Firstly, he played soccer with some of them and interacted amicably. Secondly, Sanda was acutely aware of the extensive sacrifices his father had made for his education, and he vowed to fulfill those expectations. The student harbored hopes that the indignities would cease once he cleared the final hurdle. In RUS's 70-plus years of history, only 2 members had been of African heritage, and presently, only 1 was surviving. A dark-skinned student was inducted in 2015, and Sanda was poised to be the second to undergo the ultimate initiation rite. The final initiation, also termed baptism, was about to commence. Everything the novices had endured thus far was insignificant compared to the ordeal they were set to face that weekend. December 4th, 2018, marked the commencement of the initiation. At 4 p.m., the initial challenge began. Sanda, along with 2 other candidates, donned lengthy, flowing white robes and ventured into the city with bouquets of flowers. Their objective was to sell as many flowers as possible. The one who sold the fewest would endure various penalties, such as drinking sour milk, birdseed, and, inevitably, forced alcohol consumption. Sanda finished last, selling 30 roses fewer than his peers, leading to his punishment, consuming such an excessive amount of alcohol that his speech became severely impaired. In the second phase of the initiation, the novices were positioned on their knees and posed straightforward questions. By 7 p.m., the fraternity members were indifferent to Dia's inability to articulate responses. Predictably, he was outperformed by the others and subjected to further punishment. At the conclusion of this stage, 1.5 bottles of gin were forced upon him. His body, not accustomed to heavy drinking, began to react violently. His stomach contained nothing but alcohol. Sanda's complexion turned ashen. He was unable to stand, speak, or move autonomously, teetering on the edge of dehydration and repeatedly losing consciousness. Astonishingly, all these events unfolded in a public setting. As recounted by one of the fraternity members, the second trial occurred right on the sidewalk in front of a cafe in the city square. Yet, none of the bystanders intervened. They neither alerted the authorities nor called for a police patrol. At 9 p.m., the third challenge, titled Endure the Night, commenced. The novices were hauled back to the dormitory where 18 fraternity brothers resumed their relentless hazing. The task was to consume as many beer pints as feasible. By the trial's conclusion, all 3 participants were rendered unconscious. They were breathing but remained unresponsive to any attempts to rouse them. Yet, their unconscious state did not exempt them from ongoing abuses. In line with the fraternity's custom, if someone fainted at a gathering, they were subjected to being urinated on. The brothers viewed this as a manifestation of frailty and an opportunity to exert their dominance. Proof of these acts was captured in a video taken at 11:40 p.m., which they subsequently attempted to erase. With the first day's competition at an end, the 3 new initiates were dragged to their quarters and unceremoniously deposited on their beds with the water supply disabled. For amusement, their possessions were defaced with ketchup and chocolate, and their door was locked. This meant that should any of the boys regain consciousness after consuming such a lethal volume of alcohol, they wouldn't even have access to water to alleviate their thirst. This was merely the initial day of the initiation at one of the nation's most esteemed universities. Yet, the most harrowing experiences were yet to unfold. The following day, December 5th, 2018, at approximately 10:30 a.m., the fraternity members prepared to proceed with the final stages of the grueling initiation. They roused the 3 initiates, placed them in vehicles, and drove them out of the city to a secluded village roughly an hour away. A fraternity member owned a small cottage there, shrouded by thick woods, ideal for concealing their activities. En route, they made several stops to acquire items necessary for the ceremony. The students bought aquarium fish, eels, live rodents, as well as bird and dog feed from a pet store. Next, they visited a supermarket and obtained fish sauce, commonly used in Asian cuisine for its flavor-enhancing qualities. It's high in sodium, with about 1670 milligrams per tablespoon, nearly 70% of the advised daily intake, and is not typically consumed in large amounts. They also purchased duck eggs, sardines, clams, shrimp paste, mussels, among other products. During one of these stops, they encountered an academic who observed that one of the students evidently required assistance. She addressed her concerns to the fraternity members and even proposed calling the police. However, the students persuasively reassured the professor, claiming Sanda was nearly intoxicated and in shock. They assured her that the initiation had concluded, and they intended to sober him up with a cold bath. Dismissing the professor's apprehensions, the group proceeded to the cabin in the forest. The details of the subsequent happenings were reconstructed by the police through recovered deleted video footage and scarce evidence. The complete truth of the events that transpired in that forest remains elusive. Over several hours, the 3 initiates were compelled to excavate a substantial trench, into which they were subsequently placed. As the initiates struggled to keep warm, the other fraternity members, a group of 18 young adult men, encircled the pit. They filled it with freezing water and live eels. In Belgium, during December, the average temperature ranges from +3 to +7 degrees Celsius. When the initiates became cold, the permanent members of the fraternity urinated on them from above as a twisted means of warming them up. At this stage, Sanda was suffering from dehydration and was still inebriated from the previous night's events. Even if he had the will to stand and leave, his physical state rendered it impossible. Under normal circumstances, to formally reject the initiation process, one simply had to ring a bell situated away from the trench, thereby forfeiting their place in the fraternity. The initiates could have accessed this bell at any time, but in this instance, the bell was either deliberately or inadvertently omitted, leaving Sanda without a means to signify his refusal of the initiation. His inability to stand or speak due to his condition rendered him powerless. The 3 inebriated, weary boys sat in the icy water, subjected to the senior fraternity members' acts of urination and defecation. They were then coerced into biting off the heads of live mice and eels in the water, and to follow this with fish oil. After enduring over 6 hours in such brutal conditions, Sanda's body began to shut down, and he started losing consciousness. He was extracted from the water, clothed in dry garments, and placed beside a fire. As he curled up on the grass, remaining in the fetal position for 2 hours, the initiation rites carried on around him. Instead of receiving medical attention, the students documented the situation with photos and videos while Sanda emitted distressing sounds, indicative of excruciating pain. The excessive intake of sodium triggered a severe elevation in Sanda's blood pressure, resulting in a nosebleed, and he became entirely unresponsive. At 8:57 p.m., a senior fraternity member eventually made the decision to contact emergency services. Following their advice, the students transported the unconscious Sanda to a hospital. To prevent soiling the car's interior, They placed his body in the trunk. Upon arrival at the emergency department, the fraternity members withheld crucial information from the medical team regarding Sanda's recent diet and alcohol consumption. After leaving him in the care of the hospital staff, they departed with the intention of resuming the initiation upon his discharge, an action that left Sanda with no real chance of recovery. While the medical professionals conducted tests and endeavored to unravel the cause of his condition, Sanda's organs began failing. Due to the severity of his state, he was transferred to Antwerp University Hospital for its superior facilities. There, Sanda's heart ceased functioning. He slipped into a coma, and subsequently, the 20-year-old tragically lost his life. The primary cause of death was identified as toxic levels of sodium in his body, a direct result of the excessive consumption of fish sauce. The hospital informed the police, prompting an immediate investigation into the circumstances surrounding his death. By 10:40 p.m., the other two initiates who had continued with the initiation ritual were also hospitalized. Upon learning of their children's dire condition, the parents hurried to the hospital. Meanwhile, fraternity members hastily worked to erase any evidence of the initiation. They filled in the trench used for the trials, cleaned up the room that had been smeared with ketchup and chocolate, reinstated the water supply, and purged their phones of incriminating messages, photos, and videos. By the time police arrived at the scene, there was no physical evidence left. However, investigators were later able to recover the deleted data from the mobile devices. Despite the recovery of this evidence, the investigation encountered significant hurdles. The children involved belonged to influential families, whose parents quickly sought legal representation. Although the evidence implicating 18 fraternity members in Sanda Dia's death grew stronger, the investigation was protracted and met with continual obstruction from the high-powered parents. All 18 students wiped their social media profiles and limited their communication, speaking only through their attorneys. Following the tragedy of Sanda's death, the Reyes fraternity was dissolved. The university imposed disciplinary measures on all involved, requiring them to complete 30 hours of community service and write an essay on the role of traditions in student organizations. Remarkably, none of the participants were expelled from the university. The 18 individuals involved in the incident completed their education without significant repercussions. In response to this outcome, teachers aware of the situation offered an open letter advocating for harsher penalties for the group, but no additional measures were enforced against these students. The formal legal process concluded in July 2020. Following this, attorneys representing two members of Rice sought further investigations, seemingly as a tactic to reframe the entire incident as a tragic accident and attribute blame to the deceased student for purportedly weak health. It wasn't until May 26, 2023, that the Antwerp Court of Appeal delivered its verdict, finding the 18 fraternity members guilty of involuntary manslaughter and degrading treatment. Each was fined €400 and sentenced to perform community service. Additionally, they were collectively ordered to pay approximately €30,000 in compensation to the Dia family. To avoid impacting their future prospects, the students' identities were withheld. The leniency of the verdict for those responsible for Sanda Dia's death sparked widespread dissent, leading to protest actions in various cities. Despite these demonstrations, no substantial changes have been reported as a consequence. In this case, the perceived lack of justice remains a poignant aspect of the story. This aged lady may appear as a gentle, benevolent grandma, yet she embodies the evidence that evil knows no age limit. Had it not been for the emergency service recording capturing the victim's excruciating last moments, she could have eluded punishment for her atrocious act. On May 18, 2012, at 5 p.m., Max Dashevsky received an alarming call from his close friend Jonathan Hoffman. Both young men were seniors at Farmington Central High School in the affluent West Bloomfield area, near Detroit, Michigan. Their friendship began in 9th grade during an English class, sparked by a question about their mutual appreciation for Tupac, one of the most pivotal and influential figures in the history of American hip-hop. Jonathan revealed to Max that he had recently failed a drug screening mandated by the court. He had been on probation since authorities discovered a prohibited synthetic substance in his vehicle 2 months earlier. The high schooler expressed concern over his grandmother, Sandra's, intense anger towards him. 17-year-old Jonathan Hoffman had been residing in his grandparents' apartment for 9 months following his parents' divorce and their relocation to Arizona. Initially, he went with them. But shortly after their arrival, the family received a severe setback when his younger sister, Jessica, was found to have a benign brain tumor, necessitating multiple surgeries and ongoing medical care. Adapting to a new school and coping with his sister's health issues left the teenager feeling unhappy and despondent. Jonathan was overjoyed when his grandmother, Sandra, proposed that he come back to West Bloomfield and stay with her until he completed his final year of high school. The boy was ecstatic to reunite with his friends and the comfortable environment of Farmington. Nonetheless, not everyone approved of the living arrangement between Jonathan and his grandmother. Jonathan's father, Michael, a prominent attorney for many years, had observed some disconcerting traits in his mother-in-law's personality. 74-year-old Sandra Lane, a retired educator and mother of 5, could be exacting and quite stern with others, but she, along with her 85-year-old husband, Fred, cherished their grandson deeply. Given the high schooler's yearning to reunite with his friends, his father eventually consented. Thus, Jonathan found himself thriving once again at Farmington High School, where he was recognized as the class clown. As an exceptionally intelligent student and a whiz in technology, he had secured a full scholarship to Eastern Michigan University. His peers saw him as a spirited, cheerful, and optimistic individual. That's why the call Jonathan made to Max stirred an unaccountable sense of alarm. He didn't seem like his usual self. In his tone was not only concern but palpable fear. The buddies decided to catch up later that same day. Jonathan assured his friend he would text him within the next 30 minutes to set the time. Max anticipated the message, but 40 minutes ticked by with no update from his friend. Growing impatient, the young man took the initiative to call Hoffman's number directly. The phone rang repeatedly without a response. Unbeknownst to him at the time, Jonathan would never be able to reply to him again. Just before this incident at 5:20 p.m., the West Bloomfield Township Police Department received an emergency call from the residence of Sandra Lane, Jonathan's grandmother. The young caller informed the dispatcher that he had been shot. Over the course of 3 minutes, he struggled to breathe and pleaded for assistance, stating that he was on the brink of death. The assailant had left the scene, evidently not in search of aid. The events that unfolded afterwards were even more horrific. The emergency service dispatcher listened as Jonathan frantically called out for someone to save him, followed by the sound of several gunshots. The young man screamed from the pain and then faintly said he was dying. There was a short silence. Then a woman's scream echoed, leading to a chilling quietude. By around 5:30 p.m., West Bloomfield police arrived at the neatly kept lawn of a condo within the serene, gated Maple Pleaseville community. A resident had alerted them to gunshots heard in this wealthy area. Predominantly inhabited by retirees and known for its low crime rate, especially in terms of violent offenses. As the officers disembarked from their vehicle, another gunshot rang out from within the residence. Before they could make their way inside, a woman emerged at the front door, complying with the officers' orders to disarm. A small, elderly woman with dimming red hair, wearing blood-spattered attire, stepped through the entrance, her hands raised in a halt, and informed the officers she had just taken her grandson's life. This revelation stunned the officers, yet it paled in comparison to what awaited them inside the condo. As they entered the premises, the officers were met with a ghastly tableau. Blood and smudges marked nearly every room. Bullet impacts marred the walls and furnishings, and empty shell casings were strewn across the ground. A 9mm Glock 17 semi-automatic handgun was found discarded near the entryway. Subsequent forensic analysis would reveal additional magazines for the firearm hidden within the residence. On the upper floor, police discovered 17-year-old Jonathan Hoffman. He was sprawled face down in a crimson pool, suffering from numerous gunshot wounds across his chest, arms, back, and stomach, indicating many shots were executed at close quarters. Emergency medical personnel swiftly transported him to Botsford Hospital, clinging to the hope of saving him. Yet by 6 p.m., the young man sorrowfully succumbed to his injuries. Sandra, too, was transported to the closest medical facility for precautionary measures. Medical professionals performed various examinations to confirm her well-being. The following day, Sandra Lane faced charges for the homicide of her grandson and was detained without the possibility of bail, leaving the determination of her guilt, whether for first or second-degree murder, in the hands of a jury. She professed her innocence throughout. The news of the incident plunged Jonathan's family, friends, and neighbors into profound sorrow and astonishment. They were all left pondering what could have possibly motivated Sandra to aim and discharge a firearm at her dearly loved minor grandson. The news of the tragic incident in the tranquil neighborhood spread swiftly, with the media speculating various theories. There were whispers that Jonathan had not passed a drug screening. Reporters zeroed in on a narrative of two neglectful parents who had left their substance-dependent teenage son in the custody of elderly caretakers. According to the grandmother's statement, at the time of his demise, Jonathan had an illegal synthetic drug in his system, which had previously caused complications for him. His passing was shadowed by another sensational incident involving hallucinogen consumption. Just 2 weeks prior, another youth, under the influence of drugs, was implicated in assaulting his family with a baseball bat, resulting in a deadly incident. Takir Cipriana and his accomplice had ingested a prohibited drug before the assault on their parents. Sandra Lane's attorney contended that she had legitimate concerns of facing a similar threat, fearing for her safety as she was tasked with managing a young man on probation and hard to restrain. It was widely reported that this drug could incite aggression in its users. If a situation akin to Takir Cipriana's had occurred at Sandra's residence, could that justify her actions against Jonathan? Claiming self-defense, this was the rationale Sandra provided to the police and later to the jury. She maintained that since Jonathan's return to West Bloomfield, he had become unruly, exhibited aggressive and provocative behavior, rarely left the home, and mingled with teens hooked on dangerous synthetic drugs. Sandra claimed that Jonathan's parents had not informed her of his addiction prior to his arrival, and during his stay, neither parent showed much concern for his activities. Sandra portrayed Michael, the father, as having abandoned the boy. Jonathan often had fits of rage, destroying objects, damaging furniture in his room, and smashing closet doors. If disputes arose or he was troubled, he would lash out, even breaking his own possessions like his computer, monitor, and phone. Jonathan was depicted as a youngster unable to manage his emotions, as described by Sandra Lane. Authorities verified that Jonathan had a history with illegal substances. On March 17, 2011, he was apprehended and penalized for carrying hallucinogenic drugs. Subsequently, in court, he was handed a 93-day deferred sentence, coupled with a year of probation and the requirement for random drug screenings related to these substances. Jonathan's acquaintances shared with law enforcement their worries about his drug habit and their efforts to steer him away from it. Sandra exerted her utmost effort to help Jonathan reform his ways, concentrate on his academic performance, and abide by her guidelines. Nonetheless, he resisted her attempts, proving to be defiant, erratic, and occasionally aggressive. Fred confirmed that from the moment Jonathan arrived, there were incessant, intense disputes between him and Sandra. She had even contacted the police on multiple occasions due to the high school student becoming utterly unmanageable, sought assistance from the school, but all efforts were fruitless. Sandra recounted an incident where Jonathan, under the influence of drugs, lost complete control, necessitating hospital staff to restrain him to a gurney. The elderly woman implored the teenager's parents for aid, yet his father remained indifferent and did not return to Michigan. Gradually, the grandmother grew to fear for her safety. She confided in her husband her fears regarding her grandson and his disreputable acquaintances. In a bid for self-protection and to safeguard her elderly husband, feeling cornered with no other option, Sandra acquired a Glock 17 pistol for defense in case Jonathan or his friends became aggressive. On the critical morning of May 18, 2012, Lane took the teenager for a drug test, which returned positive for illicit substances. Jonathan was instructed to undergo another test later that day. Upon another positive result, he became furious. While in his grandmother's vehicle, he resorted to swearing, violently kicking the dashboard, and at one point, seizing the steering wheel, compelling Sandra to halt the car multiple times. Jonathan even attempted to snatch the car keys at one juncture. Upon their return home, the confrontation intensified. Apprehensive he might be incarcerated, the high schooler decided to flee to Arizona immediately, demanding $2,000 and the car keys from his grandmother, but she complied with neither request. When Grandpa Fred took the dog for a walk, Sandra felt overwhelmingly frightened and attempted to pacify the teenager, to no avail. She retreated to her bedroom, retrieved the loaded pistol, hoping it would compel her grandson to heed her words or at least acknowledge her presence. Upon returning upstairs to Jonathan's bedroom and finding him in the bathroom, instead of heeding her, the boy hurled insults, kicked her in the abdomen, and struck her on the head. A struggle ensued, during which Sandra discharged the firearm, then fled to the basement in a state of panic, seeking refuge. After a while, she ventured to check on him, only for the grandson to assault her once more, attempting to wrest the gun away. In the ensuing tussle, she shot again in self-defense. This narrative paints a picture of elderly individuals trapped in a dire predicament that tragically culminated in Sandra shooting her beloved grandson out of a genuine fear for her own life. However, the question remains, is the account as Lane portrayed it entirely accurate? As the investigation deepened, a starkly contrasting narrative began to surface, one that, while still tragic, was considerably more concerning. Initial claims by Sandra regarding Jonathan's alleged violent nature didn't align with the experiences of those who knew him personally. Contrary to portraying him as aggressive, interviews revealed that at school, Jonathan was known as a humorous and peace-loving individual, always quick to diffuse conflicts with his humor and intelligence. His friends, too, testified to not observing any recent changes in his demeanor. Furthermore, Jonathan was described as having a very lean build, standing at just 1.67 meters tall and weighing merely 50 kilograms. Hardly the profile of a physically intimidating person. His stature was notably similar to his grandmother's. It appeared that instances of Jonathan's so-called rage were exclusively reported by Sandra, a claim now met with skepticism. Fred, Sandra's husband, acknowledged witnessing heated arguments between his wife and grandson, but never any physical violence, despite being almost always present at home. He noted Sandra's active role in overseeing Jonathan's education, setting strict expectations that the teenager struggled to meet. Fred even suggested returning Jonathan to his parents in Arizona, a proposal Sandra rejected, contradicting her assertion that the boy was unmanageable under her care. Jennifer, Sandra's daughter, informed police that during the 9 months Jonathan stayed with his grandparents, he maintained daily communication with her and visited them monthly. Throughout this period, Sandra never conveyed any issues between her and Jonathan, nor did she express feeling overwhelmed by his presence. When Jennifer became aware of Jonathan's legal troubles related to illicit substances, she debated with her mother about the best course of action, suggesting either rehabilitation or returning him to Arizona. Sandra convinced her that she could manage the situation independently, leading Jennifer to reluctantly agree to leave her son in her parents' custody, a decision that would later prove to be tragically significant. Authorities were summoned to the Lane household on 2 occasions. The initial call occurred in March 2012 when Jonathan himself dialed emergency services, distressed after ingesting magic mushrooms and suffering from severe paranoia, fearing for his life. The police document notes that upon their arrival, the young man displayed no aggression, merely terror. Upon seeing the law enforcement officials, Jonathan eagerly embraced one, subsequently being secured to a stretcher for his protection and transported to a medical facility. A mere 4 days following the incident with the magic mushrooms, Sandra Lane reached out to 911, reporting that her grandson was enraged and attempting to flee, while Jonathan informed the dispatcher that his grandmother was forcibly trying to confine him in her vehicle. Upon the officer's arrival, they encountered Hoffman vocally berating his grandmother. The law enforcement officials proposed intervening with the irate youth, but Sandra chose to manage the matter personally. The episode was chronicled in the police documentation as a standard oral dispute between a guardian and the child, which was amicably settled. For the detectives leading the investigation, this case increasingly appeared less like an instance of a rebellious teenager spiraling out of control, and more like a situation where a domineering woman chose to enforce her authority over a defiant child. The hearing on April 12th concerning the possession of prohibited substances and the subsequent probation had evidently enraged Sandra. She was convinced she could discipline her grandson. Up to that point, the grandmother was resolute about redirecting Jonathan onto the correct path. However, as graduation drew near and her opportunities dwindled, this mission seemed more and more like a failure. In that instant, Sandra had numerous choices. She could have contacted her daughter or sent her grandson for rehabilitation. Instead, she acquired a semi-automatic pistol and underwent several shooting lessons at a firing range. Sandra was committed to prevailing in this conflict and asserting control over her unruly teenage grandson at any cost. 4 days after Jonathan was placed on probation, Sandra Lane applied for a license to possess and carry a firearm, and on April 18th, she purchased a 9mm Glock, explaining to the store owner that she required it for home protection. She opted for a weapon intended for lethal force, along with a box of ammunition containing expanding bullets, which are designed to inflict maximum damage on the target and are often used by hunters. Following the pistol purchase, Sandra took lessons at the nearest shooting range until she felt proficient in handling the firearm, all the while keeping her newfound expertise concealed from her husband, who remained unaware of the gun in the household. He was rather taken aback when he discovered how much his wife had accomplished covertly. On the fateful day of May 18, 2012, Sandra and Jonathan returned home around 5 p.m. Sandra requested her husband, Fred, to take their dog for a walk and insisted that he remain outside until she granted him permission to return. They spent such an extended time outdoors that both the homeowner and the dog grew weary. They sat together on the grass and watched a basketball game as Fred Wayme, the grandfather of the deceased high schooler, recounted during an interview. When the sound of police sirens reached them, the man failed to grasp the situation. So, why did Sandra want Fred to depart from the residence? It appeared less like the action of a woman fearing for her life, and more like the behavior of an individual with a plan, evidently intending to carry it out without any interference or witnesses. If Jonathan had been in the agitated state described by the grandmother, it's improbable that Fred would have left them alone. However, the truly compelling evidence against Sandra was yet to emerge. At the same time that day, 5 p.m., Jonathan was conversing with his friend Max, confirming their evening arrangements. Max Deshevsky informed the police that Hoffman's tone did not convey anger or excitement. Instead, he seemed somewhat frightened. Jonathan was concerned about failing the drug test and apprehensive about his grandmother. He mentioned that Sandra was so enraged that she threatened to send him back to Arizona. Sandra claimed that her grandson violently assaulted her, striking her in the head and abdomen before she discharged the firearm. However, immediately after the incident, medical personnel from the nearest hospital examined her and found no injuries or bruises. Ballistics evidence revealed that Sandra discharged the firearm more than 10 times in various locations throughout the house, with 6 bullets striking Jonathan. 2 shots were aimed at his back, indicating that the young man was attempting to flee from Sandra. Another shot hit him in the abdomen while he was wounded and conversing with a 911 dispatcher. The police were convinced that it was Sandra pursuing Jonathan, not the other way around. The grandmother was seeking to punish her grandson for his wrongdoing, while the boy sought refuge. At some juncture, the woman descended to the basement to reload her pistol, likely when the teenager ascended to his bedroom to call 911. Subsequently, she returned and shot him at close range while he lay on the floor, bleeding, her own grandson. The toxicology report delivered the conclusive blow to Sandra's claims of self-defense. According to the report, at the time of the shooting, Jonathan's bloodstream did not contain any prohibited substances. Only a metabolite of a harmful drug was identified in his urine. The forensic examiner clarified that the residual traces discovered in the urine indicated that all substances had left the body and had no impact on Hoffman's behavior. In other words, Jonathan was entirely lucid when Sandra opened fire on him. Consequently, the jury dismissed the defendant's self-defense claim. On March 19, 2013, Sandra Lane was convicted of a serious crime against her grandson, Jonathan Hoffman. Prior to the sentencing, the elderly woman expressed regret for her actions, pleading for understanding that her intention had not been to take the teenager's life, but rather to help him resolve his issues together. Meanwhile, her daughter Jennifer urged for the harshest punishment for her mother, asserting that Sandra Lane was utterly malevolent and would undoubtedly repeat her actions if given the opportunity. She depicted her mother as a monstrous and obsessed individual fixated on academic achievement. Jennifer firmly believed that everything Lane had stated in her statement was a falsehood. She concluded by stating that her son now resided in heaven, a place that Sandra would never have access to. Lane was handed down a minimum sentence of 20 years, in addition to a mandatory 2-year term for utilizing a weapon in the commission of manslaughter. Her lawyer had pleaded on her behalf, citing concerns about her potential survival during an extended prison confinement. Jonathan's funeral occurred on May 22, 2012, with approximately 700 people who had known and cherished the young man in attendance. They fondly recalled the moments spent with him and cherished him as a cheerful individual who never failed to bring laughter to those around him. As a grandson, Jonathan fell short of his grandmother's expectations, ultimately leading her to conclude that he did not belong in this world. Upon entering matrimony, each woman envisions a radiant future filled with joyous family moments. Wendy was no exception, filled with immense joy. Yet, her idyllic union was tragically cut short after just 4 days, as Wendy was savagely taken from this life. Her face left completely marred. In marrying the man she believed to be her dream partner, Wendy had, without realizing, taken a step toward her own demise. This narrative unfolds in Miami, Florida. Renowned as a hub of festivities with its year-round splendid weather and numerous attractive locales, including South Beach, a paradise for those who revel in the nightlife with its myriad of hotels, eateries, and bars along the shoreline. Yolanda Cirillo resided slightly removed from Miami's vibrant heart, embracing a tranquil lifestyle far removed from the hustle and bustle. The young 28-year-old single mother dedicated herself to raising her daughter, striving to be an exemplary parent. Having turned her back on the party scene, Yolanda was poised to embrace stability, seek a spouse, and prioritize her family. She was in a relationship with Michel Escoto, a man noted for his height, charm, impeccable grooming, and handsomeness. Their relationship, initially platonic and harmonious, gradually blossomed into romance. Yolanda and Michel's paths crossed at a computer technology school, where there were stark contrasts. She, a serene and grounded individual. He, an adventurous romantic in the soul of any gathering, always in pursuit of excitement. Yet, as the saying goes, opposites attract. By the age of 30, Michel was earnest about laying down roots. The duo had cohabited for roughly a year, during which Escoto became a father figure to Cirillo's child. All seemed well, except for one of Michel's aspirations. He harbored ambitions of carving out a successful career and launching his own venture. Yolanda was wholly supportive, understanding that his success would ensure a stable future for her and her daughter. She harbored hopes of marrying Michel, thereby solidifying their union into a complete family unit. Her aspirations mirrored a fairy tale romance, envisioning a chivalrous rescuer who would whisk her away to a resplendent castle. Michel, having already surpassed any of her previous partners in his contributions to her life, vowed to provide the dream life they'd both coveted once his financial aspirations were realized, immediately setting his sights on identifying the most lucrative industries to venture into. In Miami's landscape, teeming with affluent and attractive individuals, there emerged a palpable need for beauty parlors, spa facilities, aesthetic clinics, and surgical centers. Michel, mulling over this demand and his own aptitudes, chose to delve into the realm of cosmetology. With a foundational knowledge in hairdressing under his belt, he aimed to grasp the business intricacies required to launch his salon, envisioned as a welcoming space for all. Michel discovered a school named Label in proximity and enrolled in courses set to commence in February 2002. Within the beauty school's milieu, Escoto, as one of the rare men with traditional orientations, found himself amidst young, driven women who lavished him with attention. A natural charmer, he easily dispensed flattery, enhancing his popularity among the female students. This experience harkened back to his younger days, replete with allurements. Despite his commitment to Yolanda, Michel encountered a formidable temptation in Wendy Trapaga, a stunning 21-year-old woman. Unbeknownst to his partner, he was prone to flirtation and often engaged in inappropriate conduct in the company of beautiful women. Escoto returned to Yolanda each night, maintaining the facade of a conventional family life. Yet, the more time he spent with Wendy, the more Michel's resolve waned. Wendy stood out from the other women Michel had met previously. She exuded sweetness, charm, and boasted a model's physique without an ounce of pretense. Raised with values of modesty and compassion, Wendy Marie Trapaga entered the world on April 29, 1981, the daughter of Miriam and Ernest. Her parents, having met in Miami and bridging a significant age gap with Miriam 21 years Ernest's junior, fell deeply in love, married, and welcomed Wendy into their lives a few years thereafter. She epitomized the term daddy's girl. Ernest cherished his little girl, ensuring she was nurtured in an environment filled with love and respect. As a cargo plane pilot, Ernest's career demanded frequent travel, leaving Wendy in anticipation of his return from each journey. She was overjoyed whenever her father arrived home, always with a present in hand for his beloved daughter. March 31st, 1988, marked an unforgettable moment in the life of 16-year-old Wendy. Her father's aircraft ignited at an elevation of 150 feet above the ground, plummeting into a barren zone adjacent to the airstrip. This tragedy took the lives of all passengers aboard. The profound sorrow Wendy experienced that day lingered with her for life. Ernest was 61 at his time of passing, leaving Miriam in profound grief. Transitioning to a widow, she poured her heart into supporting her family. Securing a position as a school administrative assistant, she diligently worked her way up to oversee the extracurricular programs at a Miami-Dade County primary school. Eventually, Miriam found love once more and wed Juan Benitez. Wendy gained step-siblings who warmly embraced the reserved girl, providing her with the much-needed affection missing since her father's demise. During her adolescent years, Wendy discovered a fervent interest in aesthetics and couture. She was the epitome of grace, with her deep brown eyes, lengthy locks, and radiant grin. Her presence commanded attention, yet Wendy remained humble. Her humility and kindness drew even greater admiration from those around her. Upon completion of her studies, Wendy entered into marriage, which soon fell apart, prompting her to emulate her two relatives who ran beauty parlors. Consequently, she enrolled in the label's Beauty Academy in Miami, concurrently with Michelle Escato. Wendy found herself instantly drawn to the gentleman. His allure, flattering remarks, and consistent ability to bring a smile to her face captivated her. Michelle identifies as an executive in web design, holding a technology degree. Possibly, Wendy's early loss of her father led her to instinctively gravitate towards older males, viewing them as a source of security. Michelle neglected to mention to Wendy that he was already in a relationship with someone else. Instead, he dedicated more of his time to this new acquaintance, displaying a profound emotional connection in seeking her favor. Their friendship deepened, leading to them spending considerable time together, while Yolanda believed her boyfriend was diligently focusing on his career aspirations. The bond between Wendy and Michelle smoothly transitioned from emotional to physical, showcasing undeniable chemistry. They were inseparable, reminiscent of infatuated teenagers. As Yolanda patiently awaited his return at home, Wendy was open to exploring all forms of intimacy to fulfill his desires and enhance their pleasure. Yolanda was perplexed by the changes in their relationship. Having been together for more than 2 years, she was unaware that Escoto frequently engaged with other women, one of whom had even financed his education in beauty school. Initially, Michelle regarded Wendy merely as another notch on his belt. However, as time passed, his feelings for her deepened. He appreciated that she didn't pressure him for commitment, didn't urge him towards marriage, and didn't impose her will on him. Yet, they kept their relationship a secret from their peers at the Beauty Academy, a situation Wendy couldn't fathom, especially since they had been an item for 2 months. Yolanda sensed a shift in their dynamic as well. Michelle grew more aloof, and their relationship began to resemble that of flatmates more than lovers. He stopped discussing his aspirations, ceased sharing details of his daily life, and largely neglected Yolanda. This prompted her to question his whereabouts and the lack of communication, which only served to drive him further away. Eventually, Michelle resolved to end their relationship, driven by his feelings for Wendy. In August 2002, he instigated an argument, expressed his grievances, packed his belongings, and departed. Yolanda was left in disbelief. She had envisioned a future with him, and yet he left without offering any justification. She sought to understand her shortcomings and the reason behind his departure. Persistent calls went unanswered by Michelle. Ultimately, Yolanda deciphered the password to his voicemail, uncovering messages that revealed he had moved in with another woman named Wendy. Yolanda was stunned to learn that in the short span following their split, Michelle had swiftly moved on with Wendy. They had found a modest apartment in a secluded part of Miami, where they began their life together, filled with dreams and contentment. The sole objective to their cohabitation was Wendy's mother, Miriam, who deemed Michelle entirely inappropriate for her daughter, due to his being nearly a decade her senior and jobless to boot. Miriam was baffled by how they managed to sustain themselves in their humble abode, suspecting that they were hastening their relationship. She was taken aback to find out their home was unfurnished, and they resorted to sleeping on the floor. Nonetheless, Miriam's primary concern was her daughter's happiness. She resolved not to meddle if Michelle was the key to Wendy's joy. Her hope was for them to forge a successful life and career together in the beauty industry, eventually marrying and starting a family. Yet, it became apparent to the rest of the family that Wendy was pinching pennies wherever possible. Whereas Michelle had a tendency to frivolously spend money despite having no visible means of employment. Wendy, unaware of the source of his finances, likely believed Michelle was making money through his tech skills. The thought that he might be involved with other women never crossed her mind, showcasing her innocent trust. Barely 3 months into their cohabitation, the couple's announcement of their impending marriage took everyone by surprise. Miriam, who had previously restrained her objections, found it impossible to stay silent this time. She was convinced that her daughter was making a hasty decision, especially considering their financial instability and lack of employment, which made even the prospect of a modest wedding seem impractical. Despite her deep love and desire to support her daughter, Miriam's disapproval was palpable. She was concerned about the precipitous nature of the decision and skeptical of her daughter's choice in partner. Nonetheless, determined to proceed, the couple planned to formalize their union at the City Hall in October 2002, opting for a simple legal process devoid of any elaborate celebration. When Miriam asked Wendy for an explanation at such a rapid pace, Wendy revealed a good reason that shocked her mother. She was pregnant. Because of their belief that children should be conceived within the marriage bond, they decided to marry. On October 10, 2002, Michelle and Wendy exchanged vows at the Miami Beach City Hall, marking their union without the fanfare of an extravagant celebration. However, the couple harbored aspirations for a modest honeymoon and set their sights on an enchanting destination not far from home, Key West, Florida. This locale, celebrated for its quaint pastel-colored homes, superb scuba diving opportunities, and the iconic 11-kilometer stretch of bridge traversing the sea, represented the ideal backdrop for their post-wedding getaway. Located at the southernmost tip of the United States, Key West promised a romantic retreat just a 3 to 4 hour drive from Miami. Eager to commence their adventure, Michelle and Wendy departed on Friday, October 11th, planning to bask in their newlywed bliss over the weekend and return by Sunday evening. Their 2-day escapade in Key West was filled with joyous moments shared between husband and wife. Yet, upon their return to Miami on Sunday, the couple found themselves reluctant to conclude their brief holiday. In a gesture of continued celebration, Michelle secured a lavish room in a prestigious hotel renowned for its amorous ambiance. Wendy, delighted by the unexpected extension of their honeymoon, informed her mother of their decision to prolong their stay. The surprise arrangement by her husband filled her with excitement. They envisioned a romantic evening that included dining out, possibly catching a movie, or dancing the night away at a nightclub. Despite harboring concerns for Wendy's well-being due to her pregnancy, Miriam's overarching sentiment was one of happiness for her daughter's joy. Close to midnight, the newly married couple arrived at the hotel and dedicated the following hours to delight in one another's company within their room. Wendy was content, yet unbeknownst to her, it would be her final night in this world. At around 5:30 a.m. on Monday, a phone call abruptly woke Miriam. A glance at the clock sent a chill through her, as a sense of foreboding immediately took hold. In the brief moment before answering the phone, her mind was flooded with anxious thoughts, predominantly about Wendy. Uncertain of what such an early call might entail, she picked up the receiver with trepidation. The voice on the other line was familiar, yet not her daughter's. It was Michelle, Wendy's husband, who confusingly asked if Wendy was with her. Michelle recounted how they had been out drinking the previous night and Wendy had wanted to keep the night going, despite his concerns for their unborn child. This led to their first argument, which happened in the car on their way back. He entered their apartment alone, leaving Wendy outside. When he checked on her after 5-10 minutes, she had disappeared. His attempts to reach her by phone were unsuccessful. Following a conversation with Michelle, agreeing to give Wendy some space, Miriam couldn't help but worry about where her pregnant daughter could be so early in the day. She tried not to panic, yet she knew it was unlike Wendy to act this way. When Miriam met Michelle at the school where she worked, she encountered a man visibly shaken, obviously distressed, and at a loss for what to do next. They were soon to discover Wendy's fate. a truth they would undoubtedly wish remained unknown, as the unfolding reality was more harrowing than they could have ever anticipated. At 6 a.m., a sanitation worker on his regular route through a commercial warehouse district in the northwest area of Dade contacted the Miami-Dade police after spotting something unusual in a parking lot nestled between two vehicles. Drawing nearer, he stumbled upon the lifeless form of a woman donned in a blue evening dress, prone and surrounded by a pool of blood, with blood splatters visible on an adjacent car, signifying that the violent act had occurred right there in the lot. Forensic specialists, upon their arrival, were taken aback. The subsequent examination of the woman revealed a disfigured body, battered beyond recognition, indicating she had been subjected to repeated blows with a heavy object, though no potential weapons were located on site. The deceased was swiftly identified as Wendy Trapaga, thanks to her driver's license and a purse containing additional identification items found by her side. Mere hours before this tragic discovery, she had been a vibrant, newlywed young woman, expectant with her first child. Upon receiving the devastating news of her daughter's demise, Miriam was engulfed in an abyss of sorrow, her tears unceasing. This woman, already bereaved by the loss of her husband, now faced the abrupt and unfathomable loss of her daughter. Amidst the detectives' efforts to ascertain the young woman's identity, Miriam was approached by a call from Michelle, inquiring about any updates on Wendy. At a loss for words, Miriam struggled with how to convey to the groom that his bride was no longer alive. A detective intervened, taking over the call to inform Michelle that they would visit his residence to discuss the matter in detail. The grim revelation about Wendy, his wife of merely 4 days, left Michelle utterly dumbfounded, robbing him of the ability to speak. Allowing him a moment to process the shock, the police later escorted Escoto to the station, seeking to compile further details about the life and untimely death of his wife. During a grueling 14-hour interrogation, Michelle recounted the events of the evening leading up to Wendy's tragic demise. The couple had left their hotel and were driving home around 3 a.m. when a disagreement over alcohol consumption intensified. During the argument, Wendy startlingly admitted that she was not actually pregnant, further fueling the dispute. Being near their apartment, Michelle decided to go inside, leaving Wendy in the car to allow both some time to cool down. That was the last time he saw Wendy. Days later, the autopsy report revealed harrowing details. Wendy had suffered 15 to 20 severe wounds to her face and neck from being struck repeatedly with a blunt object, which left her face unrecognizable. Additionally, signs of strangulation were evident, indicating an attempt to cut off her air supply. Investigators also found foreign DNA on Wendy's dress. The toxicology results showed the presence of alcohol and a sedative in Wendy's system, with her estimated time of death pinpointed between 3 and 5 a.m. on October 14th. Curiously, although she was found without shoes, her feet were clean, which, along with the absence of defensive wounds on her hands and legs, suggested she might not have attempted to defend herself or could have been unconscious or restrained during the attack. The medical examiner confirmed Wendy was not pregnant at the time of her death, leaving the reason behind her falsehood as one of the many mysteries surrounding the case. As Wendy's loved ones grieved for her, the authorities uncovered a fresh clue through Michelle's call logs. He had dialed a number at 3:15 a.m. on the day his wife passed away. The detectives followed this lead and learned the call was placed to Michelle's former girlfriend, Yolanda, who was promptly taken in for interrogation. When informed of Wendy's demise, Cerilia shared her history with Michelle with the officers. She harbored deep affection for him and was heartbroken over his abrupt exit. Despite her attempts to reach him, he remained unresponsive until the autumn of 2002, when, a few months after his departure, he answered her call. Michelle admitted to being involved with another woman, yet insisted his feelings for Wendy were non-existent and he yearned for Yolanda, hoping for a reunion. The woman, eager to welcome Michelle back, trusted him once more. With hopes of reigniting their romance, they resumed their communication and even met up again. Escoto maintained his pattern of leading a dual existence. The probe reached an impasse. The investigators were without solid proof. Lacking DNA, fingerprints, video surveillance, or even a murder weapon, the evidence was insubstantial. Roughly 2 months following Wendy's passing, Escoto once again captured the attention of the investigators, positioning himself as the leading suspect. He sought to collect funds from a life insurance policy. It was unveiled that the couple had insured themselves for $1 million. designating each other as the beneficiary of the policy. Detectives speculated that Michel might have had a million motives for desiring the demise of his young spouse and proceeded to investigate further. Escoto harbored far more secrets than expected, including a history of criminal activity. In the past, he had been apprehended and accused of armed robbery. Michel had entered a drugstore, attempted to empty the cash register, and also tried to pilfer prescription drugs. Moreover, he faced charges for hiding a weapon. 3 years subsequent to Wendy's passing, the inquiry was still active. The prosecutors felt they possessed sufficient circumstantial evidence to apprehend Michel and formally accuse him. The detectives opted to interrogate Yolanda once more, suspecting she had more information than she had previously disclosed. Following Wendy's demise, the pair reunited and cohabited, yet their shared existence was far from joyful. When Yolanda was summoned for questioning, law enforcement officials confronted her with evidence that she had financed the newlyweds' stay at a luxurious hotel in Miami. By warning Yolanda of the potential repercussions for making false declarations, the police pressured her into revealing the truth. In the autumn, as the former couple rekindled their affair, Michel claimed he was obligated to marry Wendy due to her pregnancy, despite his indifference towards her and his scheme to eliminate her if it meant securing the $1 million insurance payout. Their ultimate scheme was to amass wealth together with Yolanda, enabling them to live lavishly. Blinded by her affection for Escoto, Yolanda was indifferent to the fate of her adversary. Her only concern was for Escoto to rejoin her. Justice for Wendy Trapaga was delivered 12 years posthumously. Yolanda Cirillo received complete immunity for her testimony against Michel Escoto. She admitted to not only being cognizant of the felonious plans, but also to aiding in their formulation. After their initial failed attempts to eliminate Wendy during a holiday, Michel resolved to take decisive action. He laced his young wife's beverage with sedatives in their hotel suite. As she started to become drowsy, he transported her outside and situated her in the vehicle. In the dead of night, he arrived at Yolanda's residence, requesting his paramour to tail him in her vehicle. Subsequently, he proceeded to an isolated parking area in the northwest sector of Dade, where he instructed Cirillo to leave temporarily while he attended to Wendy. Following the agreed duration, Yolanda witnessed her paramour returning to her vehicle, smeared in blood and clutching a crowbar. Afterwards, they headed to Biscayne Bay, where Michel discarded the murder tool and cleansed himself of the crime's traces. Yolanda then drove the man back to the domicile he shared with the woman he had just slain with a crowbar. Cirillo managed his bloodied attire by discarding it in a trash receptacle. The testimony provided by the crime's alleged accomplice might have been subject to skepticism. It's conceivable that Yolanda could have played a more direct part in the murder of her adversary, given that Michel might have opted to suffocate the young woman, avoiding any bloodshed. It is the scorned lover who might have been responsible for brutally disfiguring Wendy, stripping her of her beauty. Regrettably, the truth of the matter is likely to remain undisclosed, as Yolanda's immunity agreement shields her from arrest or prosecution. This aspect was leveraged by Escoto's defense, who attempted to cast the entirety of the culpability onto his client's forsaken lover. Nevertheless, it only took the jury 2.5 hours to convict Michel Escoto of first-degree murder, handing down a sentence of life imprisonment without the chance for parole. While Wendy's family finally saw some form of justice after years of waiting, their satisfaction was incomplete, knowing that Yolanda Cirillo, the woman who might have averted their daughter's tragic end, would continue to walk free. The bond between the mother-in-law and the son-in-law frequently fails to be positive. Yet within the Lynch household, the situation was unique. The parents cherished their daughter's spouse, but this was solely before the couple cohabited. Today's narrative unfolds in Essex, England, where Jennifer Cronin and her daughter Susan resided. Jennifer was fiercely dedicated to her family and offspring. She was an engaging, friendly, and compassionate woman who shared an exceptionally tight bond with her daughter Susan. They held each other in high regard. From a young age, the girl observed the dynamic between her parents and aspired to someday establish her own family, with children and a spouse who would gaze upon her with equally affectionate eyes. In 1990, Susan introduced Kieran Lynch, a young man she was dating. At that time, she was an apprentice hairdresser, known for her unique style. Her boyfriend, a bricklayer by profession, worked on various construction projects and was 3 years her senior. Susan appreciated the way Kieran treated her. Even her friends remarked that he appeared willing to worship the ground she walked on. Their idyllic relationship naturally led to marriage in 1994. It mattered greatly to Susan that her new husband mesh well with her parents, and indeed, he did. The son-in-law and mother-in-law quickly established a rapport. The couple later welcomed 2 daughters, Matilda and Molly, who were exceedingly fond of their grandparents, visiting them no less than twice a week. The youngsters would excitedly run to Jennifer upon recognizing her gentle voice. While they were young, they saw their father as the pinnacle of virtue, the most giving and magnificent man. Kieran devoted all his leisure time to his daughters, notwithstanding his extensive work hours. Yet there was another aspect to his personality. He possessed a keen competitive spirit. Kieran was always determined to excel in all endeavors and harbored an intense urge to dominate and craft the image of an ideal family. He diligently worked to support his wife and 2 daughters. Yet the pressure mounted, and at times, he found it challenging to manage this stress and channel his feelings constructively. Consequently, his frustration often manifested in outbursts of rage, during which Kieran would damage objects and cause chaos. As time passed, the situation deteriorated. His outbursts became more intense and aggressive, particularly when alcohol was a factor. The daughters' perceptions of their father shifted. They vividly recalled incidents of their intoxicated father initially shouting, seeking any pretext for criticism, then progressing to hurl plates against walls, slam doors, and overturn furniture. In such moments, the girls would seek refuge, hiding from their irate father's view until he slept. They moved silently within the home, careful not to rouse him. Following these fits of anger, he exhibited remorse, mending what he had destroyed the prior day and attempting to rationalize his actions. He earnestly apologized to his wife and daughters, promising such incidents would not recur. Yet, inevitably, the cycle resumed. Like many individuals facing domestic violence, Susan was engulfed in shame and discomfort, concealing the turmoil within her household. Despite striving to project strength before her daughters, she was consumed by tears in the solitude of night, puzzled by the transformation of a once affectionate man into a domestic oppressor. On evenings Kieran returned home agitated, Susan and her daughters would ensure the windows were sealed, preventing neighbors from overhearing the tumult of his outbursts. The slightest provocation could ignite a storm. Delays in Susan's return from work prompted Kieran to scour the town in search. As the girls matured, they began to confront their father in defense of their mother, initially causing him to retract. His demeanor would swiftly shift, reverting to the affectionate partner and parent. However, a grave incident occurred when Kieran, engulfed by fury, nearly struck his daughter, who intervened to shield Susan. Despite the family's efforts to veil their strife from external scrutiny, the grim reality gradually surfaced. In 2015, those close to Kieran began to observe unsettling transformations in him. A friend of Susan's, residing in a different city, was taken aback by Lynch's altered appearance. Having not seen him for several months, she hardly recognized him during an unexpected meeting in the city. He had significantly slimmed down, appeared gaunt, and had a distant, contemplative demeanor. The cause behind these changes soon came to light. While doing laundry, Susan found a packet of white powder and a slender tube in her husband's work attire after emptying out the pockets of forgotten change in various items. She instantly connected this discovery to Kieran's erratic behavior, which filled her with fear. She confronted her husband via text, lamenting his choices and prioritizing them over his family. Yet Kieran offered no excuses, merely pleading with her not to disclose anything to their daughters. As substantial amounts of money started vanishing from their credit card, Susan attempted to confront Kieran, who responded with defensiveness and aggression. The atmosphere at home grew increasingly tense and perilous. On one occasion, in the absence of their daughters, Kieran menaced Susan with a knife to her throat, threatening her life and his own. Another instance saw him preparing a noose in the attic. Such terrifying incidents became more common. Susan recognized that without intervention, the situation might escalate disastrously. Despite the difficulty, she felt unable to confide in her own mother, Jennifer, wishing to spare her distress. Nonetheless, despite her desire to reverse their circumstances, Susan acknowledged the necessity for resolute action. In November 2016, following 24 years of wedlock, the Lynch couple agreed to part ways. Kieran bravely chose to exit the family residence and move back in with his parents. It was a challenging decision, yet Susan recognized that their daughters were mature enough and shouldn't be exposed to endless disputes and uproars. Additionally, her primary worry was their well-being. The lady was comforted by the fact that the separation transpired with minimal conflict. She even held herself accountable for not acting sooner. Susan was unaware that her ex-spouse had no intention of giving up. When Kieran departed, a congenial ambiance finally pervaded the home. The strain diminished, and everything started to ameliorate gradually. For the first time in a long stretch, Susan experienced joy. She and her daughters were able to engage in conversations peacefully, enjoy films together, share laughter, and relish life. The need to anticipate and decipher their father's mood upon his return from work was no longer present. Susan sensed that she still attracted male attention, and she blossomed more with each day. Friends noted that Kieran appeared to have resumed a typical lifestyle. Susan was pleased that someone once dear to her had at last made a wise decision and abandoned his detrimental behaviors. Even though they were no longer together, Kieran remained the father of her children. Following an exceedingly stressful and challenging family life, Susan was cautious about entering new relationships until she encountered Mike. Their relationship evolved gradually, embodying the adage, once bitten, twice shy. Having endured significant challenges previously, she was now exceedingly prudent. Gradually, Mike became significantly integrated into her life. Susan even confided in him about her former spouse, the difficulties she endured, and the complexities of her past relationships. To fully detach from Kieran and progress, securing an official divorce was essential. Susan felt hesitant, knowing Lynch's erratic and unpredictable nature, yet she opted to text her former spouse, proposing a cafe meetup for discussion. To her astonishment, the encounter unfolded without a hitch. Kieran appeared to accept the news of her wish to initiate divorce proceedings positively. For once, they conversed as friends who had shared significant experiences. Following the meeting, the ex-partners even shared brief texts. Lynch expressed his happiness for her newfound relationship, and Susan voiced her hope that Kieran would find fortune in love soon as well. It seemed like a triumph, she believed, until she received multiple messages from her ex the following day. Lynch's attitude towards the divorce shifted dramatically from the previous day. He claimed indifference towards his ex-wife and demanded $60,000 for his agreement to sign the divorce documents, arguing that he had already left with the house and all its contents and refused to passively watch another man occupy his space. Furthermore, he expressed a disturbing preference for her demise. More alarmingly, Kieran escalated beyond textual threats, manifesting in the yard wielding a hammer. At this juncture, Susan was home alone with her pet. She promptly dialed for emergency assistance. By the time law enforcement arrived, Lynch had damaged several flower pots and outdoor ornaments. The police reached the scene shortly after he vanished. 2 officers entered the premises, to whom Susan presented the menacing messages. As they recorded her account, Kieran returned, vociferously proclaiming his intent to confront his wife and asserting that no one could protect her. The responding officers arrested Kieran Lynch for disrupting the peace. Yet, even in handcuffs, his zeal remained undiminished. He persisted in throwing insults at his ex-wife. Subsequently, he faced charges on 3 counts: life-threatening behavior, carrying a dangerous weapon, and causing property damage. On January 29, 2018, at the magistrate's court, Kieran refuted all allegations. He was slated for a court appearance on March 29th and was granted bail with a strict directive to avoid any contact with Susan or to come near her residence. The decision left Susan and her daughters feeling vulnerable and incredulous at their home, dismayed by the law's leniency and doubting the police's commitment to their safety. Ignoring the bail stipulations, Kieran continued to breach the no-contact order. He incessantly phoned Susan and even appeared at her residence, escalating her fear for her safety. He deceitfully told mutual friends that Susan's new partner was taunting him with messages. Kieran also targeted his daughter's phones, aware that they would relay everything back to their mother. The situation forced Susan into a state of constant vigilance, fearful of leaving her children unattended due to Kieran's relentless calls, which could reach up to 80 times daily, and his continuous threats of showing up. Due to his failure to adhere to the bail conditions, Susan once again reached out to the authorities. Concurrently, Lynch made an unsettling call to emergency services, confessing an aborted suicide attempt due to lack of courage. A squad comprising psychologists and police officers was dispatched to engage with him. Upon their arrival, Kieran assured them he was in good condition, leading to the recommendation that he consult with his general practitioner. Observationally, he didn't seem to necessitate further mental health assistance, concluding that intervention. Nevertheless, his barrage of calls and messages persisted unabated. On multiple occasions, Kieran trespassed near the residence, engaging in trivial but menacing acts to display his proximity. He disrupted the power supply by infiltrating the garage, tampered with the garden hose at Susan's mother's home, and occasionally skulked beneath the house windows. His actions now instilled fear not only in his ex-wife and daughters, but also in his aging mother-in-law. The persecution of his former spouse escalated, with Susan's appeals to law enforcement yielding no outcomes. The police regarded it as mere verbal harassment, thus dismissing the woman's grievances each time. They arrived, recorded statements, and vowed to make an arrest, yet nothing evolved. The authorities viewed the situation as a standard domestic dispute between former partners and failed to recognize the severity of the circumstances, particularly since the offspring were grown and, in the detective's view, Lynch was not deemed a threat. Nevertheless, Kieran contacted his eldest daughter, issuing a threat of sexual assault. Upon discovering this, Susan was appalled. Law enforcement initiated a search for Lynch at his abode, but the officers did not locate him, hence advising the women to seek refuge with acquaintances or family members to steer clear of being in the domicile unaccompanied. Matilda sought refuge at a pal's place, while the oldest daughter visited her grandmother, who resided alone following her husband's demise. Jennifer and her granddaughter spent the evening watching TV, sipping tea, conversing, and momentarily forgetting about Kieran and his menacing behavior. Yet, the moment they retired for the night, the telephone chimed. Upon Jennifer answering, there was sheer silence, assuming it was a mistaken call, yet the phone persisted in ringing multiple times. Both Susan and Molly were restless due to the unnerving calls. Molly sensed the presence of someone lurking in the garden. Against the shadowy backdrop outside, a silhouette appeared to be present. They barricaded themselves with Jennifer in the washroom and contacted law enforcement. It was around 2 a.m. Concurrently, Susan's phone was inundated with calls and texts, prompting her to reach out to the police as well. Regrettably, with limited law enforcement resources, constant surveillance for the harasser was unfeasible, leading to advice on turning off the mobile and ensuring all entry points were securely locked. Over the previous 24 hours, the police were summoned 6 times. Yet despite the menacing communications, the officials declared a shortage of staff to send a patrol. On March 13, 2018, as the granddaughter departed the residence, Susan decided to visit her mother to offer support and reassurance. She assured the senior that she would not stand by while her family was tormented and intimidated by an individual who simply could not come to terms with their separation. At 72, Jennifer found solace in the daylight, venturing into the garden with her canine companion, while Susan observed them from indoors as she prepared tea. A smile crossed her face watching her mother engage with her dog. At that moment, she attempted to contact her former spouse's employer to ascertain his whereabouts, but he hadn't shown up there for several days. Unbeknownst to Susan, he would soon be alarmingly close. Abruptly, a disturbance was heard from outside, and at 10:48 a.m., Lynch charged into the garden, wielding a container of combustible fluid. He vociferously yelled, swore, and hurled insults at his mother-in-law. The man approached Jennifer and began to soak her head, face, and back with the fluid. The elderly lady shrank and shrieked, yet Kieran persisted in drenching her. Susan called emergency services, pleading for assistance. The operator instructed her to flee to the street to dodge Kieran, a suggestion the frightened woman promptly followed. She sprinted to the street's end, looked back, and saw no one pursuing her. Recalling her mother was still in the backyard, Susan hastened her return. At that juncture, Lynch doused himself with the remaining fluid and lit it using a lighter. Flames immediately engulfed both individuals. Situated in a serene dead-end street adjacent to the Benfleet Golf Course, Jennifer's residence quickly became the focus of police, firefighters, and medical response teams, including an air ambulance helicopter that descended onto the golf course. Upon Susan's return to her mother's garden, she was met with a ghastly sight. 2 grotesquely altered bodies. Jennifer's hair, Eyebrows and eyelashes were utterly scorched, her face reddened by burns and her skin charred. Amidst her excruciating pain, Jennifer conveyed to her daughter her deep love and that she and her granddaughters were her entire universe. Despite her dire state, she maintained her maternal instinct, reassuring her daughter that all would be well. Kieran, too, was gravely injured with burns across his entire body. He was found seated, leaning against a wall, heavily breathing, and still smoldering. Overwhelmed by emotion, Susan berated him for his actions. She struggled to comprehend how she could have once been married to a man who now inflicted such harm on her beloved mother, whom she deeply cherished and shielded from any harm. She never envisioned such a tragic culmination. Kieran was apprehended under the suspicion of attempting to murder Jennifer Cronin. Both he and the senior lady were rushed to the hospital in a grave state. A couple of hours following the assault, Susan was summoned for an interview to piece together the event's chronology. Mr. Lynch had saturated himself and Mrs. Cronin with an inflammable substance and ignited them in the rear garden. The 50-year-old was navigating through a contentious divorce from his spouse, Susan. His former partner had persistently alerted the officials about Kieran's hostile actions, exacerbated by illicit drug use. Yet a shortfall in police resources and misjudgment in handling the situation culminated in dire outcomes. This incident swiftly caught the attention of the press, and the law enforcement's lack of action faced harsh scrutiny. Medical personnel notified Susan that Kieran's prognosis was grim, with burn injuries covering 97% of his body. This news dealt another harsh blow to the daughters, who recollected their father as a devoted and affectionate figure. One daughter expressed a desire to visit Kieran for a final farewell. The only recognizable feature was the tip of his nose, now blackened and burnt. She expressed her love to her father and lamented the tragic turn of events. Whether Kieran was aware of his daughter's last expressions of love remains uncertain. He succumbed to his injuries that evening. The toxicology report uncovered that his system had traces of both alcohol and illicit drugs. Meanwhile, Jennifer Cronin was fighting for her life in the intensive care unit, with burns covering 33% of her body, mainly on her upper body and head. She underwent surgical procedures, yet the prognosis for recovery was grim due to the extent and severity of her injuries. Susan made frequent visits to the hospital, witnessing firsthand the agony her mother endured. Ready to accept the inevitable, Susan was prepared to let her mother pass, longing for her to be in the comfort of her late husband's presence, as the sight of her mother in such torment was unbearable. Jennifer persevered for 17 days, but sadly succumbed to her injuries on March 30, 2018 at 13:32, with her family by her side. Her expression was peaceful. She was aware that her time was drawing to a close. Susan clasped her mother's hand, solemnly observing as her journey in this world concluded, and she drew her final breath. Upon realizing that his former spouse was beginning to move forward with her life, Kieran Lynch was consumed by an uncontrollable sense of possession and overwhelming jealousy, further exacerbated by his dependence on illegal drugs and alcohol. He had been covertly observing his wife for a year, but the moment she started to contemplate her own future, it triggered a drastic change in him. By assaulting a vulnerable elderly woman, his aim was to inflict pain on her daughter, fully understanding the deep bond between them. On Monday, January 21, 2019, an in-depth week-long inquiry commenced at County Hall, Chelmsford, focusing on unraveling the events leading to the deaths of 72-year-old Jennifer Cronin and 50-year-old Kieran Lynch. Susan, deeply impacted by these losses, initially harbored anger towards her ex-husband. However, as details emerged about the inadequate response from law enforcement, her frustration shifted entirely towards them. She had been familiar with her husband's escalating aggression with each communication, witnessing how his hostility expanded from her to those close to her, Jennifer, Mike, and even his daughters, creating an impression that Lynch was determined to ruin the lives of his ex-wife and her loved ones through verbal abuse, threats, nocturnal phone calls, and unlawful entries. Susan recognized Kieran's psychological instability, but could never foresee it leading to harm against her family. She publicly voiced her family's dissatisfaction with the outcomes, criticizing the police for their lack of serious engagement and unfulfilled promises. Kieran's failure to be arrested for breaching bail conditions was highlighted as a contributing factor to Jennifer Cronin's demise. Susan aspired for the authorities to draw lessons from this heart-rending incident, hoping it might prevent future tragedies, despite it not being able to bring her mother back. She emphasized the police's fundamental duty to protect and serve the community, a service she felt was grossly neglected in her family's case. Following the revelation of the family's plight, Detective Superintendent Stephen Jenkins took the initiative to personally meet with the Cronin family, extending an apology for the tragedy they endured. "Do good, and you'll receive evil," declares a familiar proverb. From an early age, we were instructed to act kindly and assist those in our vicinity. Regrettably, at times, benevolent actions towards others may result in irreversible outcomes. Megan Newton, born in 2001 to Michael and Sarah, also had a stepsister named Demi. However, Megan primarily spent her time alongside her mother, Sarah, forging an incredibly tight-knit bond akin to best friends. Megan kept no secrets from her mother, while Sarah, in return, would often consult her daughter, who displayed wisdom beyond her years on various significant issues. The woman characterized her daughter as highly ambitious, dynamic, and affable. Megan's friends described her as someone with an excellent sense of humor, compassionate and thoughtful, whereas her grandparents remarked that she possessed a golden heart. From a young age, she was always prepared to lend a hand to others. In her elementary school days, Megan encountered a new classmate, a girl whose family had recently relocated to England from China. The girl faced significant challenges in understanding the curriculum and interacting with peers due to her lack of English proficiency. Consequently, the teacher placed her beside Newton, hoping the compassionate and helpful Megan would assist the newcomer. Megan embraced this role wholeheartedly, overcoming the language barrier to aid her classmate in adjusting to a new environment. By the time the girl moved back to China, she had achieved a respectable level of English proficiency. Megan's kindness and open-mindedness persisted into her teenage years and adulthood, finding expression in her passion for sports. Soccer, in particular, captured her heart, leading her to join the Stoke-on-Trent women's soccer team. Additionally, she engaged in coaching, dedicating her weekends to training young girls under 7 years old instead of resting. Striving for her Level 1 coaching badge, Megan aspired to secure a sports scholarship in the USA. Her commitment to sports, especially soccer, was so profound that she chose to pursue a career in it, even getting a small tattoo of a soccer cleat to express her love for the game. Upon completing her schooling, Megan embarked on her college journey, aiming to pursue a career as a sports therapist or physiotherapist. This milestone was particularly thrilling because she was the inaugural member of her family to attend a tertiary education institution. Megan Newton was a gifted and appealing young student, brimming with potential and poised for a bright future. Regrettably, her prospects and dreams were cut short by a tragic incident in the spring of 2019. Newton balanced her time between 3 part-time jobs. For the 18-year-old, Friday, April 19th, started as a typical day, with no forewarning of what was to come. She wrapped up her shift at a local fish and chips shop and made her way home around 10:20 p.m. By this point, Megan was living independently from her family, who endorsed her autonomy, confident in her judicious planning and decision-making. She had moved into her own apartment in a high-rise on Fletcher Road, embracing the solitude and added responsibilities that came with it. After changing, applying makeup, and styling her hair, Megan set off to enjoy a night out with friends. They hit a nightclub in Hamley, spent the night dancing, indulging in a few drinks, and reveling in the joy of the moment, with Megan beaming throughout. In the early hours of Saturday, just before 3 a.m., Megan, accompanied by a friend and a young man, took a taxi back. It seemed she had returned safely to her apartment to rest. However, the reality was tragically different. The following morning, just after dawn, a neighbor discovered a set of keys near the building, marked with what appeared to be blood. These were handed over to a housing complex worker who, upon noticing blood splatters, decided to check on the apartment's occupant. Entering the apartment with the neighbor, they were met with a chilling sight. Megan's naked and bloodied body was found on the bed, face down, having been stabbed multiple times with a kitchen knife that was found close by. This gruesome discovery would forever scar the neighbors, who remembered Megan as a vibrant, resilient, and exceptionally charming young woman. The apartment paperwork and IDs confirmed the identity of the deceased as Megan Newton, unmistakably the young woman who had been violently slain in her own bedroom. Police, upon arrival, promptly notified Megan's family, who were then faced with the harrowing ordeal of identifying their daughter at the morgue. This was a daughter they had nurtured with immense love and had only recently given the independence to live by herself, never envisioning such a catastrophic end in their most horrifying nightmares. The crime scene was immediately sealed off, and forensic experts were dispatched to Megan's apartment to gather any possible clues. The autopsy disclosed the gruesome extent of the assault Megan had suffered. It was found that she was first strangled, losing consciousness due to restricted airways, followed by receiving 9 stab wounds to her back, which punctured both lungs. Additionally, it was evident that she had been sexually assaulted. The murder weapon, a kitchen knife that belonged to Megan, was located in the vicinity. The forensic pathologist determined that it was these knife wounds that ultimately led to Megan Newton's premature demise. The blood-stained knife and apartment keys were dispatched to the lab, with the hope that forensic analysis could reveal the assailant's DNA. It was hypothesized that the criminal had accidentally dropped the keys while exiting Megan's apartment post-murder. The investigation commenced with detectives piecing together the sequence of events leading up to the tragic incident. Through discussions with Megan's acquaintances and relatives, it was ascertained that she had spent the evening at a club before hailing a taxi home in the wee hours. The investigative team scoured surveillance footage from the vicinity of the nightclub and the path Megan took home in an effort to trace her final movements and possibly pinpoint the assailant. Their attention was drawn to footage showing Megan boarding a taxi, accompanied by a friend and an unidentified young man, raising questions about this individual's identity and potential role in the crime. Subsequent video from within Megan's apartment complex showed the same young man again, this time within the premises. Luckily, a camera positioned in the common hallway offered a clear view of the entrance to Megan's apartment, allowing officers to monitor who came and went that night. The goal was to identify the murderer by scrutinizing the video recordings from the evening of the incident. At approximately 3:44 a.m., Megan was seen entering her apartment building's lobby with the same young man she had shared a taxi ride with around an hour before. They proceeded together towards her apartment, with Megan appearing cheerful and exhibiting no signs of apprehension or unease around the individual. Upon reaching her door, Megan used her keys to unlock it, and they both went inside. However, a particular moment caught the detective's attention. While Megan was unlocking the door, the young man stood behind her, scanning the area and even making eye contact with the camera lens at one point. This behavior immediately raised suspicions among the police. They pondered whether the young man had premeditated harming Megan, possibly after coercing her into sexual acts, and was checking for potential witnesses. Further scrutiny of the video footage from the remainder of the night revealed a disturbing fact. Only the young man exited the apartment the following morning. Around 5:54 a.m., he attempted to leave the building but realized he needed a special key fob to do so. He returned to Megan's apartment momentarily, retrieved the keys, and eventually managed to exit the building. The external surveillance captured him discarding an object where the blood-stained apartment keys would later be discovered by a neighbor. The most damning evidence of his involvement in Megan's death was obtained from another surveillance camera, which showed him walking away from the scene, inspecting one of his hands that appeared to be covered in blood. This critical piece of evidence marked a pivotal moment in the investigation. Identifying the young man as Joseph Trevor was swift due to a recent run-in with the law. Just the day before the tragic event, he had been arrested for possessing ketamine, a substance used both medically and in veterinary settings as an anesthetic and sometimes for pain management. The police officer who had apprehended Trevor immediately recognized him in the surveillance footage. Trevor, 18, hailed from a reputable family deeply rooted in the law enforcement community, with both his father and mother serving as police officers. He resided in a neighboring district and had a long-standing acquaintance with Megan Newton, as they had been high school classmates. Joseph led a seemingly typical life. He was academically successful and shared Megan's passion for sports, excelling in soccer to the extent of playing semi-professionally for Newcastle Town and securing a sports scholarship in America, with plans to relocate there after completing his studies. Like Megan, Joseph was pursuing higher education in Newcastle, poised for a promising future. To many who knew him, Trevor was perceived as a kind, affable, and sociable individual. Yet, he harbored a less visible, volatile side to his character, capable of shifting from a jovial and engaging demeanor to one that was reclusive, brusque, and abrupt without any discernible trigger. This unpredictability left acquaintances unsure of which version of Joseph they would encounter on any given day.
When the detectives in the Megan Newton case began to look more closely at Trevor's background, they came across some very unpleasant information about his past. Approximately 3 years earlier, at age 15, was suspected of abusing another teenage girl. Because the attempt at intimate contact failed, he was not charged or punished. However, everyone around the school knew about the incident. After this incident, classmates at the school began to call Trevor a predator and child molester, since the public arrest of the school could not go unnoticed. Now for the police, this information became a warning because Megan was also subjected to forced sexual intercourse that night. Joseph Trevor was identified as the primary suspect in the assault case. Investigators focused on his movements that night. They already knew from surveillance footage that he was near the nightclub and got into the same taxi as Niden, later heading to her apartment with her. But what he did before that moment and why he ultimately went to Newton's home was unclear. Detectives discovered that Joseph Trevor was also at a party with his school friends the previous evening. In fact, he and his friends ended up in the same bar as Newton by chance, and since they all knew each other from school, they simply greeted each other and continued to enjoy their time separately. However, Joseph didn't spend much time in the nightclub. The security noticed he had a packet of white powder with him. Therefore, they simply put him out on the street and called the police. The squad that reached the location detained the young man and escorted him to the nearby police department. It might have been known to the officers that his parents were also members of the law enforcement community. Yet Trevor faced no legal repercussions. Instead, they unlocked his cuffs, seized the ketamine, and let him go, advising him to return home and refrain from further illicit drug use. Contrary to their advice, Joseph didn't head home. He went straight back to the club where Megan was. Predictably, entry was denied to him, and close to 2:40 a.m. After Megan exited the establishment, she ran into her old school peer by the taxi queue. Trevor shared his recent ordeal at the police station with Megan, voicing his concern about facing his parents due to his excessive drinking. Given that his parents were cops, they were probably already informed of his apprehension for illegal drug possession. Overwhelmed and uncertain, the young man was at a loss for what to do next. Megan, always compassionate and eager to assist, allowed Joseph Trevor to borrow her phone to try and contact a friend. Unfortunately, he couldn't secure a place to stay for the night. Witnessing the disarray in her tipsy former classmate's demeanor, and being the altruistic and observant person she was, consistently eager to lend a hand in challenging times, Megan invited Joseph to crash on her living room sofa. Come morning, once sober, he could decide on his approach with his parents. Trevor gratefully agreed to the proposition, which explains why surveillance footage captured him entering a cab with Megan and her companion. En route, Joseph messaged his dad, falsely claiming he'd spend the night at a buddy's place. The cab first dropped Megan's companion off at her address before proceeding to take the pair to the apartment complex on Fletcher Road. It was there the duo was recorded by surveillance as they entered the building, and later, as Trevor exited, discarding the stained keys in the yard. The authorities were convinced that in those few hours, Joseph violently assaulted his schoolmate, leading to her tragic demise. He was left with no plausible way to dispute the accusations. The evidence unequivocally implicated him, with law enforcement prepared to apprehend him. Astonishingly, Joseph Trevor's parents were already informed by their son about his role in Megan Newton's untimely death. After departing from the apartment just before dawn, he made his way to a bridge over the A500 in Stoke-on-Trent. Climbing onto the barrier, he sat with his legs hanging over, gazing at the roadway beneath. It appeared he was considering leaping, overwhelmed by his actions against Megan and the imminent reality of his capture. Perhaps he sought an escape from facing the repercussions of his deed, contemplating ending his life definitively. Additionally, it was revealed that Joseph Trevor had a history of depression and prior suicide attempts. He had been spotted on this bridge previously. As Joseph deliberated over life's purpose once more, a bystander took note of him. This individual did not overlook the situation and promptly alerted the authorities about a man on the bridge seemingly in a suicidal state. Upon their arrival, Trevor was swiftly transported to the hospital for a psychiatric assessment. Following the evaluation, medical professionals determined it was safe for him to be discharged, and he went back to his residence under the watchful eye of his father. Back in his own space, he divulged the entire truth to his mother. Joseph found himself unable to withhold the burden any longer, conscious of the inevitable consequences of his deeds. After gathering his thoughts,
he reached out to his mother via owning up to his role in Megan Newton's demise with the simple admission, "I did something bad." He extended these confessions to a few of his friends as well, seemingly compelled by guilt or other emotions to disclose actions that couldn't be reversed. Upon receiving her son's admission, Joseph's mother wasted no time in contacting the authorities to relay his confession. By this point, however, the investigative team had already pinpointed Joseph Trevor as their prime suspect through footage from surveillance cameras and were in the midst of coordinating his apprehension. The young individual was escorted to the police department for an interrogation, where he admitted to aspects of the offense. Specifically, he acknowledged being present at Megan's residence that evening, but was at a loss to detail the execution of the audacious assault. His narrative was consistent with surveillance footage showing their entry into her apartment. Generously, she offered him the couch for the night to avoid confronting his parents in his unkempt state. Trevor asserted that their physical interaction was consensual, and following their intimacy, he experienced a blackout. His recollection of subsequent events was non-existent. Essentially, Joseph didn't refute the assault on the woman, but the specifics of the incident and what drove him to such measures remained unclear to him. This portrayal aimed to distance him from the image of a deliberate, unfeeling aggressor, suggesting he shouldn't be fully accountable for his deeds. The sole memory he held onto from that night was Megan's apology. At 15, when Trevor faced allegations of harassing a peer, he was derided by his classmates who labeled him with various derogatory terms. Some branded him a predator and charmer, and among them, Newton allegedly tagged him as Rolf Harris by Trevor's account. Rolf Harris, a famed Australian TV host, musician, and painter, was convicted of child abuse and other sexual offenses. These monikers deeply wounded Joseph throughout his youth, and he endeavored to erase these bitter memories over time. However, Megan's apology for the schoolyard taunts abruptly revived these painful recollections, propelling him into a fit of anger. In that instant, he purportedly seized a knife. Nonetheless, the detectives dismissed his account, skeptical of his conveniently lapsing memory at a pivotal juncture. The law enforcement officers were persuaded that he was fully cognizant of his actions throughout. It's likely that Megan merely turned him away that evening. She offered him a place to stay out of friendship, recognizing his troublesome situation. Having known each other for years, attending the same school and now the same college, they shared numerous interests and aspirations for the future. Their mutual enthusiasm for soccer might have led her to believe it was safe to share her space with him overnight. Upon his return to the apartment, Joseph attempted to escalate their interaction to a more intimate level, but Megan was not receptive and declined, which deeply frustrated Trevor, especially under the influence of alcohol and drugs. Disregarding her objections, he chose to use force. In an effort to eliminate the risk of her reporting the incident, he decided to take drastic measures to ensure her silence permanently.
Shortly after Megan Newton's tragic passing, Joseph Trevor faced charges for intentionally ending the life of his fellow student, along with committing 2 acts of sexual violence. The assault was discovered to have occurred in a manner involving multiple attacks. He was apprehended at his residence, and after several months, the legal proceedings commenced. Despite his initial partial admission, Joseph opted not to admit guilt, later altering his claim to acknowledge causing Megan's demise but insisting on consensual relations that night. He clung to this assertion until the trial's outset. On February 17, 2020, as the trial began, he abruptly shifted his plea to guilty on all counts, presumably to avoid the trial process, anticipating the jury's quick dismissal of his defense. Consequently, he was sentenced to life imprisonment, with eligibility for parole after a minimum of 21 years and 65 days. The courtroom witnessed a startling moment when Trevor, at his sentencing's conclusion, turned towards Sarah, Megan's mother, and silently mouthed, "Sorry." This gesture deeply infuriated her. The apologies, now meaningless, could not amend the past nor alleviate the prolonged distress Megan's family endured awaiting the trial. His late apology appeared as a further insult to the grieving mother. No apology could restore Sarah's daughter or negate Joseph's heinous actions that evening. The indifference Trevor displayed in the surveillance footage post-incident, as he left Megan's residence, underscored a lack of remorse for the irreversible harm inflicted on Megan and her family, robbing them of future joys and milestones, leaving them with a lifelong burden of sorrow. Megan's closest companion, Ricardo Eccles, revealed that they had plans to shop in Manchester the day following her passing. He was heartbroken upon learning of his friend's sudden loss. The news left him incredulous and in a state of shock for multiple days. However, in honor of Megan, he composed himself and initiated a fundraising effort to assist with the Newton family's funeral costs. He successfully collected several thousand British pounds, which were then given to her mother. Megan was always a pillar of support for those in distress, and now it was time for them to reciprocate, providing emotional support and assistance to her family and everyone who cherished her. In her brief yet impactful life, Megan was a fervent supporter of the Stoke City Football Club. During a game, the team's passionate supporters and players dedicated a minute of applause in remembrance of the departed young woman. Her family and friends gathered funds to set up a commemorative bench in Megan Newton's honor in a serene park in Stoke-on-Trent. This bench, overlooking a scenic pond and a playground suitable for football. On March 23, 2015, at about 2 p.m., the Vallejo Police Department in California received a distress call from a man whose voice was noticeably slurred, suggesting he was either intoxicated or under the effect of narcotics. He claimed his girlfriend was missing, specifically that she had been abducted. Yet, his account seemed illogical. Upon the police's arrival at his residence, they found him to be completely disoriented, with a potent chemical smell pervading the home. Inquiring about his girlfriend's whereabouts, the man spun a fantastical tale. According to him, entities resembling extraterrestrials had invaded his home, clad in aquatic gear and wielding laser weapons. Despite the bizarre nature of his narrative, the police were compelled to pay heed and initiate an inquiry since his girlfriend was indeed missing. However, the investigation revealed a narrative even more fanciful and bizarre than the one described to the emergency operator. In the late hours of March 22, 2015, 29-year-old Denise Huskins noticed the buzzing of her phone. She grabbed her mobile and, upon reading a message from her former boyfriend Aaron Quinn, felt a stir of apprehension. They had ended their relationship, yet now Aaron was requesting her presence for a calm discussion. It was a Sunday, and Denise was by herself in her modest Vallejo apartment, located in the San Francisco Bay Area of California. She had no intentions of leaving her home that night. She preferred to spend the evening in solitude. Additionally, she was reluctant to engage with Aaron following his previous actions. Denise replied to her ex, stating it was too late, and she would rather delay their chat to a later date. However, following another message from him, there she was, seated on her sofa, staring at her phone, contemplating her next move. Denise encountered Aaron the summer before, after relocating to Vallejo from Boston, Massachusetts. Holding a doctorate in physical therapy, she aimed to join Kaiser Hospital, renowned for its advanced programs for individuals with head and spinal injuries. It was there Denise crossed paths with Aaron, a tall, athletic man with dark hair and striking eyes. The two young individuals quickly warmed up to each other and began engaging in conversations. Initially, these discussions delved into their pasts. Aaron had previously been engaged, but his relationship ended when he discovered his fiancée's infidelity. Denise initially played the role of a sympathetic ear, listening to his experiences. However, she found herself drawn to him. Their rapport was undeniable, and gradually, their friendship blossomed into a romantic connection. By the autumn of 2014, Denise and Aaron were officially an item, but by March 2015, Denise stumbled upon messages Aaron was sending to his ex-fiancée, begging her to return. Understandably upset, Denise cut off all contact. Despite knowing they shared many interests and had contemplated marriage, this realization didn't ease her heartache. She felt deeply betrayed, her love for Aaron turning into pain. And now, Aaron was flooding her phone with texts, seeking a meeting to discuss their situation. He was relentless, refusing to accept her rejections. Despite Denise's efforts to resist, his persistence left her conflicted, her heart still entangled with him amidst the turmoil. Swayed by persistent coaxing, Denise felt valued and ultimately acquiesced. Rising from her sofa, she prepared herself and proceeded to her vehicle. Departing her residence at approximately 5:30 p.m. and stopping to pick up a pizza en route, Denise reached Aaron's two-story dwelling on Kirkland Avenue's 500 block. She retrieved the pizza from the passenger side, took her purse, and approached the entrance. The following day, A workday for both at the hospital saw Quinn reporting sick under the pretense of illness around 7 a.m., whereas Denise texted her supervisor, citing a sudden family crisis necessitating her absence for the entire week. This was uncharacteristic for her, having never missed work previously. Her supervisor, aware of her application for a distinguished scholarship requiring document submission by week's end, reminded her, yet received no reply. He speculated that a grave family issue must have arisen, given Denise's lack of response. That Monday, with both Quinn and Huskins absent from their jobs, the Vallejo Police Department was alerted by a call from 30-year-old Aaron, whose narrative was muddled and seemed implausible. Officers at the scene detected a strong chemical scent alongside numerous empty beer containers, observing Aaron in a disheveled state. Upon questioning about illegal substance use, Aaron didn't refute, but claimed kidnappers compelled him. The officers, skeptical, commenced their inspection, heading upstairs to the master bedroom where the chemical odor intensified. The room appeared freshly cleaned, with the floors immaculate except for something on the mattress. Just as they were about to exit, a small red blood spot on the bed caught their attention. Returning downstairs to delve into Aaron's account once more, he began to recount his tale anew, his speech impaired. That evening, close to 3 a.m. at Quinn's residence, where he and his girlfriend Denise were staying, a group of men clad in black aquatic gear stormed in. They rudely awakened the pair by casting an intense beam of light straight into their eyes, rendering Aaron unable to determine the exact number of assailants. The invaders swiftly restrained the house owner and his partner with nylon cable ties and made them wear swim goggles that were coated with an opaque material, ensuring they could not see anything. Beyond their aquatic attire, the assailants were equipped with guns featuring laser targeting, electroshock weapons, and potent torches. As they entered the dwelling, illumination and laser beams crisscrossed, blinding everyone. Subsequently, Aaron and Denise had to put on headphones that played an unusual, calming tune, soon followed by a synthetic voice reassuring them that they faced no threat, and this was simply a theft. Staying calm would mean no harm would come to them. Heeding the synthetic message, the frightened couple complied fully, remaining silent and motionless. Eventually, the headphones were taken off Aaron, and he was commanded to proceed to a different chamber. There, the perpetrators demanded his banking credentials and financial details. Aaron complied without delay, intimately bidding farewell to his finances. Later, Aaron and Dennis were escorted back to the living area, where one assailant checked their blood pressure and then forced them to consume a concoction from a mug, evidently a sedative blended with another substance. Just before succumbing to unconsciousness, Aaron heard the burglars' final directive. They had set up surveillance cameras throughout his home for monitoring purposes. He was explicitly instructed not to contact law enforcement, and as leverage, they would take Denise as a captive, promising to send further directions later. Immediately after the sedative took effect, Aaron lost consciousness and became oblivious to his surroundings. As he came to, he realized Denise was gone. Struggling to free himself, he eventually managed to untie his hands and grabbed the phone to dial emergency services. The responding officers shared a look, silently considering a theory. Perhaps Aaron had been involved in Denise's disappearance, possibly even her demise, had concealed her body, and then meticulously cleaned the residence to eliminate any traces. The overpowering odor of bleach and other cleaning products seemed to support this suspicion. Under the weight of his actions, he likely turned to alcohol, evidenced by the line of empty bottles and his incoherent speech. In a bid for innocence, he might have delayed calling for help, fabricating an elaborate tale about unusual abductors in water gear to cover his tracks. Dismissing his story as a diversion, the police instructed him to prepare for a visit to the station. After a grueling 17-hour interrogation, they were unable to extract any solid evidence from Aaron. Despite his assertions, Denise remained missing. The Vallejo police quickly launched an extensive search operation involving canine units, divers, and numerous volunteers. Upon interviewing Denise's roommate, they learned of the couple's recent separation, hinting at a possible motive. Nevertheless, before pointing fingers at Aaron, it was crucial to exhaust the kidnap hypothesis. They meticulously examined every aspect of his account, seeking any clue about the alleged captors' identities, appearance, and statements. Yet, the more they delved into Aaron's narrative, the more implausible it seemed. According to Aaron, he had surrendered his banking credentials to the perpetrators, Yet an investigation showed that his funds remained untouched. Intriguingly, just 2 hours before alerting the authorities, Aaron tried to extract a considerable amount of money from his credit account, purportedly for purchasing a boat. Confronted by detectives, Quinn claimed that the abductors had demanded a ransom of $8,500. Yet he was unable to justify this to the bank, hence the fabricated boat purchase story. The notion that feelings would jeopardize their liberty for such a modest sum led to doubts about the authenticity of Aaron's account. Aaron also refuted any allegations of tampering with his residence and was perplexed by the peculiar odor pervading the space. Furthermore, during his questioning, a detective observed Aaron's enlarged pupils, hinting at possible drug use or a mental health issue, such as schizophrenia, which could account for his bizarre account of extraterrestrial-like abductors, perhaps spurred by hallucinations. Faced with the case's intricacies, the Vallejo police sought the FBI's expertise. One of the first actions by the arriving agents was to administer a polygraph test to Aaron, which he notably failed. Recognizing the skepticism towards his story, he promptly retained legal representation, eager to safeguard his interests. With his legal team's approval, Quinn granted law enforcement unrestricted access to his dwelling, electronic devices, attire, and even provided his blood and fingerprints. The following day saw over 100 search units combing through Vallejo. A police sonar identified an object in the bay resembling a human body, yet divers were unable to locate it. By then, Aaron, having secured legal counsel, was no longer in custody. The search for Denise Huskins intensified, with her image disseminated across media outlets and displayed throughout the city. Despite these efforts, the detectives and FBI agents dedicated to the investigation encountered significant hurdles in advancing their probe. On the afternoon of March 24th, a journalist of the San Francisco Chronicle was startled by a peculiar email. The sender claimed to be the abductors who had invaded Quinn's residence, donned in aquatic attire. The message reassured that Denise was safe, substantiated by an attached audio clip of her narrating recent news articles. This evidence momentarily alleviated fears, confirming her well-being at least up to that morning. Yet, the transmission raised eyebrows for a couple of reasons. Firstly, Denise's tone was eerily composed, akin to a broadcaster delivering the news without a trace of duress. Secondly, and more incriminatingly, the email originated from an account registered to Aaron. This revelation led authorities to surmise a collusion between Quinn and Huskins in staging the abduction. Their suspicion deepened when Aaron presented his cell phone, which had logged calls from the so-called kidnappers, albeit from an untraceable burner phone, rendering the caller's identity anonymous. Determined, the police tracked the purchase location of the disposable phone to a store in proximity to Quinn's home. Surveillance footage from the establishment unambiguously captured an individual matching Aaron's description, tall, athletic, with dark hair, making the purchase, further entangling him in the mystery of the orchestrated kidnapping. Nearly 2 days after her mysterious disappearance, on March 25th, Denise Huskins reappeared at her mother's residence in Huntington Beach, California, situated about 400 miles away from Vallejo, the scene of her alleged abduction. Finding her mother absent, Denise turned to a neighbor to reach out to her father. Her recounting of events took an even more bizarre turn than Aaron's narrative. Denise claimed she was indeed abducted and held by a quartet of men, confined to a diminutive space. According to her, these individuals disclosed that their actions were the fulfillment of a client's directive. Despite the circumstances, she was reportedly treated with a degree of care, provided with food, water, and even permitted to maintain personal hygiene. Denise initially engaged openly with the police, but upon perceiving a sense of skepticism from the officers, she withdrew and promptly sought legal representation. The investigators were left bemused, perceiving the entire narrative as an elaborate and finely orchestrated sham. They speculated that Aaron and Denise might have concocted this elaborate abduction scenario either as a bid for notoriety, a cry for attention, or perhaps as an escape from ennui. The detectives struggled to comprehend why these two, hailing from affluent backgrounds, with notable achievements and bright futures ahead of them, would feel compelled to fabricate such an elaborate ruse. The Vallejo police convened a news briefing to assure the community that there was no cause for alarm regarding assaults in the vicinity. They had not conclusively identified the abductor, nor could they confirm the existence of one, yet they assured residents they were safe. The probe extended over several weeks with little to no headway. The press kept a keen interest in the matter, and comparisons were eventually made to the film Gone Girl, in which the protagonist orchestrates her own abduction. The authorities expressed frustration that Quinn and Huskins had misdirected attention and resources from genuine crime victims and called for their formal apology to the Vallejo populace. Nonetheless, Denise and Aaron stood firm in their narrative, maintaining their honesty. Consequently, the police decided against any further measures until a notable development unfolded in the investigation 2.5 months later. On the early hours of June 5, 2015, a Dublin police officer in the Alameda County region of Northern California uncovered a vital piece of evidence in the mystery of Denise Huskins' vanishing. That morning, the police were alerted to a burglary at a residence. The incident report detailed how an intruder entered a home under the cover of darkness, attempting to restrain a couple. The man managed to fend off the assailant while his wife secured herself in the bathroom to call emergency services. The burglar escaped but mistakenly left behind his smartphone in the corridor. Unlike previous instances, this phone was traceable to an individual via a telecommunications provider. The police tracked the registered address, only to find the property abandoned, its mailbox brimming with uncollected mail. 3 days subsequent, the carelessly discarded smartphone directed law enforcement 200 miles northeast of Vallejo to an isolated cabin near South Lake Tahoe, California. With caution, the officers entered the cabin, encountering a tall, athletic man with dark hair amidst the chaos of leftover food, garbage, and clothes piles. Yet, what initially escaped the officers' notice was the vehicle parked outside. Upon inspection, the car, which was reported stolen, contained various peculiar items: flashlights, a plastic firearm with laser sights affixed, modified swimming goggles, a black diving suit, and headphones. The trunk also held a laptop owned by Aaron Quinn. This discovery led to the apprehension of one of the individuals behind Denise Huskins' abduction, a man bearing a striking resemblance to Aaron Quinn, yet not him. In truth, the couple had never crossed paths with this individual. There was no prior connection between them. The abductor was identified as Matthew Muller, a 38-year-old attorney educated at Harvard University, an ex-Marine, and until recently, a reputable member of the legal community before being disbarred. Muller had embarked on a new chapter marked by an array of peculiar criminal acts. The authorities had linked him to the Dublin home invasion, and their inquiry established his involvement in Huskins' abduction from her partner's residence, supported by numerous pieces of evidence. The seemingly outlandish account provided by Aaron and Denise to law enforcement was, in fact, accurate. Their only error was in believing that multiple individuals in diving gear had invaded. In reality, the mastermind was solely Matthew Muller. Likely influenced by a state of half-sleep and confusion, Aaron and Denise did not discern that the entire episode was executed by a single individual. The intense light shone in their eyes created the illusion of multiple invaders, and the pre-recorded message played through the headphones, in which the assailants claimed to be a professional debt recovery squad, furthered this misconception. Quinn and Huskins were not Muller's initial targets. He was also implicated in a 2009 Palo Alto home invasion.
Nonetheless, a paucity of proof enabled him to elude repercussions for that incident. Muller, a highly intelligent lawyer with military background, crafted a scheme so elaborate and fantastical that authorities initially suspected the couple of orchestrating a hoax. His actions were meticulously planned, showcasing his intelligence alongside significant mental health challenges. He was diagnosed with bipolar disorder and experienced intense psychosis. Muller also claimed to suffer from Gulf War syndrome, indicating a detachment from reality. Encountering Aaron and Denise seemingly at random, he developed an intense fixation on them. Employing a drone for surveillance, Muller obsessively tracked the couple's movements, associations, and activities for 3 weeks, leading up to the abduction. Aaron remembered noticing a bright light in the sky on the eve of the incident, contemplating the presence of a drone, yet unable to conceive it was monitoring his home. His logical mindset didn't alert him to the possibility of a deeply disturbed individual's surveillance. Thus, he dismissed the observation. With sufficient data collected, Mueller executed his plan by invading Quinn's residence at night, adorned in a diving suit. He restrained both Aaron and Denise, blindfolded them with goggles, and played a recorded message through headphones, suggesting the presence of multiple abductors. Isolating them in separate rooms, Mueller then assaulted Denise, exploited her defenselessness, confined her in his car's trunk, and transported her to a secluded cabin in South Lake Tahoe. He detained her there for 2 days before releasing her near her parental home. Additionally, he appropriated Erin's laptop, later using it to send an email to a San Francisco Chronicle journalist via a specialized software. Upon awakening the following day, Erin, faced with the harsh reality that Denise's abduction was not a figment of his imagination, initially contacted his bank to request a $8,500 advance for the ransom. In his determination to safeguard his partner, he fabricated a reason, stating the need for the funds was to purchase a boat, a spur-of-the-moment excuse driven by his concern for Denise and his panicked state. Following this, Erin reached out to Kaiser Hospital, sending a message to Denise's supervisor to inform them of their unavoidable absence from work, a directive given by Mueller as part of his manipulative scheme. The investigation later revealed a disturbing video recorded by Matthew, showcasing him assaulting his blindfolded captive on 2 occasions. In light of these revelations, the Vallejo police issued an apology for initially dismissing the ordeal as a fabricated story. The ordeal led the couple to take legal action against the city of Vallejo, citing their wrongful treatment during the investigation. Their lawsuit concluded with a victorious settlement of $2.5 million, acknowledging the grave misjudgments and errors made in handling their case. Matthew Mueller admitted guilt to the kidnapping charges and was sentenced in 2017 to a 40-year prison term. At the trial, he voiced regret for his deeds and the suffering he inflicted. It emerged that Mueller originally intended to abduct Quinn's ex-fiancée, a relationship that had ended. Following the ordeal, Huskins battled persistent nightmares, endeavoring to heal from the trauma. She hesitated to discuss the kidnapping publicly until Mueller's conviction in 2017. Huskins disclosed that multiple men had detained her, a detail Mueller corroborated by admitting to having accomplices, although he refrained from identifying them. In the aftermath, as Huskins faced skepticism and allegations of fabricating the kidnapping, it was ironically the perpetrator who came to her defense. He dispatched 2 anonymous letters to the media, disjointedly asserting her genuine abduction. Despite the bizarre developments, the narrative concluded on a positive note. Erin and Denise solidified their bond through marriage, welcomed a child, and co-authored a book titled Victory F, chronicling their harrowing journey. To some, their tale might border on the incredulous, yet it resonates deeply with those acquainted with the chaos wrought by mental instability. There's nothing more perilous than an individual solely focused on amassing wealth regardless of the consequences. Such a person grows apathetic not just to the suffering of others, but may also infringe upon the most hallowed aspect, life. Onkar Verma, a journalist based in New Zealand, had a 25-year-old sister named Wensi living in London with Amarjit Chauhan and their 2 young kids. Eagerly anticipating a reunion after a lengthy period of separation, Onkar was looking forward to his visit to his family, a visit that was to happen for the first time in nearly a decade. The excitement was palpable, as he and Wensi hadn't seen each other in 9 years, making this feel like a long-awaited family gathering. Onkar would regularly engage in lengthy conversations with both his sister and their mother, who resided with Wensi and assisted with the childcare. They excitedly planned activities for Onkar's visit, discussing places to see and ways to enjoy their time together. Yet, on February 15, 2003, these daily communications came to an abrupt halt. When Verma attempted to reach Wensi or their mother, there was no response. Initially, he assumed the Chauhan family might be on a trip, but as time passed, doubt crept in, especially given that they hadn't mentioned any travel plans, particularly with his visit just around the corner in 5 days. Concerned for his family's well-being, Onkar contacted the Metropolitan Police for help. A police unit sent to the Chauhan residence in West London found it deserted. Neighbors and work associates speculated that the entire family had returned to their native India. Further information from Scotland Yard only escalated Onkar's worries for his sister, mother, and nephews, transforming concern into outright fear. He resolved to travel to the UK himself to delve into the mystery of his family's vanishing. Upon his arrival in London, Verma found himself isolated in a foreign land he had never before visited. He made his way to the Chauhan household in Hounslow, only to be greeted by a scene that left him in utter disbelief. At a cursory glance, the interior appeared normal, as if its inhabitants had merely stepped out briefly and would return momentarily. However, the reality was starkly different. The family had been absent for weeks. Laundry remained in the washer. Children's toys and baby bottles with remnants of food were strewn across the floor and on the kitchen counter. Food residues had spoiled. It looked as though someone had been interrupted while doing the dishes. Clothing and suitcases were neatly stored away, yet some personal belongings were haphazardly dispersed throughout the three-bedroom home. Food was still in the refrigerator. Yet, the discovery that plunged Anchorage into despair was finding his mother's cherished prayer book within the home, a possession she always kept close and never left behind. The lack of any sign of a struggle suggested a sudden and hurried departure. Verma was baffled by the sudden disappearance of his sister's family, including 2 young children. With convincing proof that his relatives had not left their home voluntarily, Anchorage persuaded the authorities to initiate an inquiry. Subsequently, the investigation into the missing family was intensified, with a team of detectives from the Serious Crime Division taking charge. Verma had lost all hope of reuniting with his family and seeing their shared dreams come to fruition. The family at the center of this mystery included the accomplished 46-year-old businessman, Amarjit Chauhan, his spouse Nancy, her mother 51-year-old Charanjit Kaur, their 1.5-year-old son Devinder, and his 3-month-old brother Ravinder. Amarjit, through his loving marriage with Nancy, had achieved an enviable life. Yet, in February, the entire family, spanning 3 generations, mysteriously disappeared without leaving behind any clues. This narrative unfolds around the individual responsible for their disappearance, highlighting a story of immense treachery by a heartless criminal driven by greed. This criminal nearly succeeded in eluding law enforcement and those closest to him by orchestrating a crime so distinctive and horrifying that its feasibility was beyond anyone's imagination. In 2003, Amarjit Anil Chauhan was at the helm of Chiba Freight, a flourishing fruit import business located near Heathrow. His staff revered him as a contented family man and a benevolent employer. Blessed with a devoted wife and 2 young children, Anil saw his workforce as an extension of his own family. During peak business periods, he would often treat his team to pizza and beverages, managing the enterprise with a relaxed demeanor that earned him immense respect from his employees. They were unable to fathom the future of the company should Chauhan decide to relocate to India. The idea of returning to his native land was a recurring theme in discussions with his wife, Nancy, who harbored hopes that Amarjit, at 46, would soon retire, allowing them more time to devote to their children. Given his diligent work ethic and substantial earnings, this dream was within reach. Nancy longed to return to India, frequently expressing this wish to her husband, and over time, Anil warmed up to the notion of eventually selling the business to move back to his roots, to the familiar landscapes of his youth and his loved ones. This plan might have come to fruition had it not been for the fact that owning Chiba Freight placed Amarjit Chauhan in the crosshairs of someone with designs on the thriving company, someone who aimed to seize control of it without spending a dime. In January 2003, Kenneth Regan, freshly released from prison, sought employment at Chiba Freight. Amarjit Chauhan, who had also faced legal challenges due to tax evasion, empathized with Regan's plight and his professed ambition to make a fresh start. Known among his staff for his leniency and willingness to offer multiple chances, Amarjit understood the difficulty of securing employment post-incarceration. Having rebuilt his own life, he felt inclined to extend the same opportunity to Kenneth, thus hiring him as a driver. Regan proved to be hard-working, unafraid of menial tasks, and performed his duties commendably. However, Regan was no ordinary delivery driver. 5 years earlier, he had been an adept smuggler, known among his associates as Captain Cash. By the late 1990s, Ken Regan had established himself as a seasoned criminal, having set up various freight companies around Heathrow that doubled as fronts for smuggling illegal drugs into the UK. Amidst his criminal undertakings, Captain Cash enjoyed a lavish lifestyle, rubbing shoulders with notable figures in London's underworld and entire criminal dynasties. Despite his modest demeanor, Regan fancied himself a wealthy bon vivant and a globally recognized figure in the criminal underworld. It was in a chic London bar where he first encountered socialite Belinda Bruin. In 1997, at the height of his illicit activities, he flaunted his wealth, driving a Mercedes and lavishing Bruin with costly presents. She later depicted him as sophisticated, charming, albeit a bit coarse, a man who dressed impeccably, flaunted luxurious watches, and wasn't shy about displaying his affluence. sometimes seen with a briefcase full of cash. Regan believed this lifestyle would elevate his social standing, despite essentially possessing nothing and leading a reckless life. Belinda Bruin found herself ensnared in Regan's world of crime and illusion, much against her will. Regan, consumed by his infatuation with Bruin, bombarded her with calls and emails, expressing his ardor as if he were a lovesick teenager, proclaiming her his obsession and desperately seeking her affection. Despite their superficial acquaintance, Kenneth audaciously referred to her as his girlfriend to his acquaintances, leaving Belinda bewildered, unaware of his identity. Shortly after, Regan faced arrest. On June 17, 1998, Kenneth Regan was apprehended with 25 kilograms of a white substance, facing up to 18 years in prison. Opting to cooperate with the prosecution, his testimony led to the conviction of 12 significant criminals, substantially reducing his own sentence. Released 4 years later, Captain Cash found himself devoid of almost everything, no friends, no money, and his assets confiscated. He resettled in a modest bungalow with his father, pondering ways to reclaim his wealth and status. Considering a return to the illicit drug trade, Regan saw Amarjit Chauhan's Chiba Freight as the ideal platform for his comeback. He meticulously crafted a scheme to usurp the company, executing it with such stealth that its fruition went unnoticed. Upon joining Ciba, Regan discovered through colleagues that Chauhan was contemplating selling the business to relocate overseas. Seizing this opportunity, he approached Chauhan with a fabricated story of having investors ready to purchase the freight company, dangling a $4 million offer to pique Amarjit's interest. As Chauhan deliberated over this lucrative proposal, Regan advanced his plan. However, Regan's ambitions extended beyond Ciba Freight. Belinda Bruin, having relocated to Devon to escape Regan's relentless pursuit during his incarceration, found herself once again the object of his attention. Shortly after his release, Regan resumed his attempts to contact her, this time proposing her involvement in a business venture. Aware of her financial predicaments, including a large house, a mortgage, and the tuition for her children's private schooling, especially after her last partner had abandoned her to face these challenges alone, Regan's timing was impeccable. When Belinda reached out to him in response, Regan outlined his strategy to assume control of Ciba Freight, suggesting her as a prospective director despite her inexperience, with a tempting offer of a $54,000 salary for just 2 days of work per week, equivalent to $68,000. Aiming to leverage her situation, Belinda negotiated for $72,000 salary, roughly $90,000, a sum to which Regan readily acquiesced. The job proposition provided Regan with a pretext to visit Belinda at her remote Devon residence. He fabricated various excuses, claiming she needed to sign a document or assist with paperwork, for which he was willing to make the journey from London. However, Regan's true interest lay in the land surrounding Belinda's property, an obsession that soon became apparent. He voiced complaints to the property owner about the condition of the alley and the road leading to the house, expressing a desire to remove some trees, construct an elegant wall complete with electric gates, and install a drainage ditch. His intentions seemed to be driven by a desire to enhance the property's appeal for Belinda, or so it appeared to her. By February, Amarjit Chauhan had reached a pivotal decision regarding the future of his company. He arranged to meet with the purported buyers to negotiate the sale. On the morning of the Thursday just before Valentine's Day, he departed from his office, informing his staff of an appointment at Stonehenge. Amarjit also indicated his intention to conclude the sale and promised to personally update them on the matter. This was the final occasion his employees saw him, marking the beginning of a mysterious and alarming disappearance. On a Monday morning, the staff of Ciba Freight were taken aback by an unexpected declaration during a gathering. Kenneth introduced Belinda as the new proprietor of the company, stunning everyone and sparking numerous queries. The employees wondered about Amarjit's whereabouts, why he hadn't bid them farewell, and what their future held. Regan produced a letter claiming that Amarjit Anil Chauhan had decided to sell the company due to deteriorating health and planned to move abroad with his family, Nancy, and their children. The signature on the letter was recognized as Amarjit's by the staff. Owing to the business's thriving nature and the heavy influx of orders, the team had little time to dwell on these developments. They ceased their complaints and discussions about what lay ahead, focusing instead on their work. Belinda was assigned a desk and computer in the office and began to familiarize herself with the company's financials as per Reagan's instruction. Yet, by her second day, Belinda felt ill and decided to leave for Devon without waiting for Kenneth. Upon reaching her home, she noticed an old, dilapidated Jaguar parked by the road and spotted two men, William Hornsey and Peter Reese, allies of Ken Reagan, excavating a drainage ditch on her property, which greatly upset her. Belinda confronted Reagan upon his arrival at her property, airing her frustrations and rebuking him for the unauthorized excavation. She expressed no need for a drainage ditch, to which Kenneth responded that he had intended it as a surprise and assured her everything would be sorted by summer. However, these plans were derailed when the Metropolitan Police launched a fresh investigation into the entire situation. In 2003, Kenneth Reagan, previously convicted for trafficking illicit drugs, was on the cusp of reclaiming a life of affluence. With Amarjeet Chauhan, the former proprietor of Seba, now vanished, Reagan had taken charge of his own customs depot, an ideal disguise for smuggling in illegal narcotics. For half a decade, Kenneth had harbored a distant admiration for the high society figure Belinda Bruin, and now she was enlisted in his operations. It appeared as though all his aspirations were realized, leaving nothing but to relish in life's pleasures. Yet, the foundation of Reagan's empire was on the brink of exposure. Onkar Verma's worry and dread for his kin drove him to alert the authorities, urging them to launch a comprehensive probe. The lead detective resolved to interrogate the individual last seen with Amarjeet Chauhan, the vanished family patriarch, on the day he went missing. This individual was Kenneth Reagan, a former prisoner whose conduct was suspicious from their initial meeting. He attempted to persuade the police that Mr. Chauhan was an untrustworthy entrepreneur who had encountered financial woes and had vanished of his own volition. He was eager to offload his business and was probably in a different country by this point. Nevertheless, the investigators were not swayed by Kenneth's narrative. Utilizing advanced forensic methods, they traced the movements of Reagan and Chauhan's cell phones on the day he vanished. Initially, Amarjeet Chauhan's phone was pinpointed at his residence in Hounslow, then followed to Stonehenge, where a business rendezvous was planned. At this location, Reagan's phone made contact with the businessman's phone, after which both proceeded towards Devon. The detective's sole clue was that Belinda Bruin, the new head of Seba, resided in Devon, prompting a decision to visit her. Upon hearing the police's plans to inspect Belinda's premises, Reagan was enraged and tried to dissuade her from permitting any searches on her property, proposing they convene elsewhere. Belinda remained unmoved by Kenneth's advice. Subsequently, Reagan's aide, William Hornsey, contacted the chief detective, claiming he had recently communicated with Amarjeet Chauhan and that the missing entrepreneur was still in Britain. The officials agreed to a meeting in Newport, Wales, close to the passport agency. Seizing this chance to unravel the mystery of the disappearance, the authorities called off their visit to Belinda's residence. If Amarjeet Chauhan was indeed safe, they could conclude the investigation. The only step left was confirmation in person. The rendezvous at the passport agency was arranged for Monday, but to Belinda's surprise, Reagan, Hornsey, and Reese paid her a visit over the weekend. The trio observed a trail near the stable that was in disrepair and decided to mend it with gravel. Hence, when the digger was delivered, Belinda wasn't taken aback. She simply took her children to the city, leaving the men free to work on her estate. 2 days afterward, detectives arrived at the intended site for the meeting with Chauhan, only to witness Hornsey and Reagan's vehicle show up, linger briefly, and then act as though a call had been received to abort the meeting, leading to its cancellation. The authorities traced the calls, yet the phone was not registered under any name, sending them on a futile quest in their pursuit of the Chauhan family. As Reagan resumed his duties at Seba, the detectives reverted to their initial strategy and summoned Belinda Bruin for questioning. Prior to this, Kenneth had vehemently advised her against disclosing the work he had orchestrated on her land to the police. Nonetheless, Belinda found his request peculiar and immediately relayed Reagan's suggestion to the investigators. She revealed that his associates had encroached upon her farm uninvited and excavated a drainage trench, despite her not having requested such work. Belinda was unaware of the significant aid she had just rendered to the police, convinced a grim revelation was imminent at the drainage trench's location. The detectives hastened to Devon. They undertook excavations, conducting thorough forensic analyses with the assistance of skilled forensic archaeologists and pathologists. Over the following 5 days, the Serious Crime Investigation Unit sifted through heaps of soil on Belinda Browen's property, anticipating the discovery of Amarjit Chauhan and his family's remains, yet none were found. By April 2003, after more than 2 months of searching for the absent family members, the police realized they had been searching in the incorrect location. In Bournemouth, Dorset, a favored holiday destination along the English Channel for the British, Dave and Carl Chapon, a father and son duo, had planned a canoe outing for the evening. The sea was serene, the breeze was crisp, and the climate was perfect for extended strolls. Eventually, they spotted something large floating afar. Drawing closer, they discovered it was a human corpse, heavily swollen from prolonged water exposure, rendering it initially difficult to discern its gender. The father remained with the corpse, while the son hurried back to land to alert the rescue services. The man found himself waiting in the darkness on the canoe for nearly 3 hours, unwilling to abandon the deceased. This evening would be etched in their memories forever. The morbid find was eventually transported to the morgue in Bournemouth, but identification of the body took nearly a week. It was the lost entrepreneur Amarjit Anil Chauhan, who had endured a blunt force trauma to the head, and his mouth was taped shut. The post-mortem indicated the probable cause of death was the head injury followed by suffocation. The victim's attire was removed for forensic analysis, and 62 miles away, the police continued their probe in Belinda Browen's field. Their diligence was rewarded. At the dig site, law enforcement uncovered crucial evidence: charred garments, Nancy's jewelry, strands of hair, and bits of children's clothes. The hair was later confirmed to be Mr. Chauhan's. These discoveries hinted that they had found the burial site for a family of 5. The once secluded property in Devon, owned by Belinda, was utilized as a clandestine burial ground for the Chauhan family. Later, as police grew suspicious, the corpses were unearthed and transported by boat to the center of the bay in Bournemouth, where they were disposed of in the sea. Until the discovery of the body, SEBA's staff clung to the hope that their employer would someday return. Even if he had indeed sold the business, he would have at least come to bid farewell or perhaps make a visit after some time. However, all hopes shattered like a fragile bubble when the drowned man was confirmed as Anil Chauhan. The situation worsened as concern for the remaining family members grew. Nancy was merely 25 years old, and their children were just infants. The thought that someone could extinguish so many innocent lives was harrowing, yet all evidence pointed tragically in that direction. The excavation area was disproportionately large for the concealment of just one corpse. A smaller site would suffice for hiding a single individual. Furthermore, the simultaneous disappearance of the family patriarch along with his wife, mother-in-law, and children strongly suggested a shared tragic end. Such an act was beyond the comprehension of any ordinary individual. Consequently, the probe escalated, transitioning into a top-tier investigation into particularly heinous crimes. Kenneth Reagan emerged as the prime suspect, yet both he and his accomplice Hornsey were nowhere to be found. Initial leads indicated that Reagan and Hornsey had escaped to Europe, leaving their associate Peter Rees behind. Peter Rees, age 39, and seemingly overwhelmed by remorse for the crime, inexplicably confessed the circumstances surrounding the missing family's end to a complete stranger he met. He was haunted by the fear that he might bear the entire blame. The idea that Reagan could have directed a weapon at 2 young children was beyond his understanding. This confession inevitably reached the authorities, and Peter Rees was apprehended within 12 days. Despite revealing the crime to a passerby, he remained silent during police interrogations, and the fate of the Chauhan family continued to elude discovery. 3 weeks subsequent to this, anglers found another corpse in the Solent, a stretch of the English Channel to the north. Onkar Verma was summoned for the identification, and despite the advanced decomposition, he identified the remains as those of his younger sister, Nancy.
Kenneth Reagan was apprehended in Belgium after eluding capture for 2 months, and William Hornsey turned himself in to authorities 6 weeks later. With all 3 primary suspects detained, they nonetheless refused to aid the investigation. With 3 members of the Chauhan family still unaccounted for and no eyewitnesses to their murders, the investigation required incontrovertible evidence. Unbeknownst to the detectives, Amarjit Chauhan himself had left behind a vital piece of evidence. In April 2005, the commencement of the longest criminal trial in the history of British law took place. The prosecution endeavored to demonstrate that Kenneth Regan, William Hornsey, and Peter Reese were responsible for the kidnapping and murder of the entire Chohan family. Throughout the trial, which lasted 10 months, over 4,500 items of physical evidence were examined. Yet, it was the analysis of phone communications that constituted the cornerstone of the prosecution's case. Amarjit Chauhan had initially met with Regan under the pretense of negotiating the sale of the Chiba Freight Company, but was subsequently abducted and confined at Kenneth's residence. There, he was coerced into signing documents to create the illusion for Chiba employees that he had sold the business and relocated abroad. This crucial piece of evidence emerged from a relative of one of the accused, the son of William Hornsey, who delivered to the police a gray suitcase filled with A4 sheets bearing Mr. Chauhan's signatures. Although Reagan's initial scheme involved only eliminating Amarjit, he concluded that Mansi would inevitably sound the alarm, prompting him to decide to exterminate the entire family. Text messages revealed that Peter Reese was tasked with monitoring Chauhan, while Regan and Hornsey proceeded to the family's London residence, where they lingered for several hours. The precise circumstances of how the remaining family members were murdered remain speculative. Amarjit's murder took place in Regan's bungalow, followed by a thorough renovation and the replacement of all furnishings, obliterating any potential evidence. However, a breakthrough came 8 months later when experts discovered a clue inadvertently left by Amarjit Chauhan himself. Although his clothing was promptly analyzed, the socks, deemed irrelevant, were overlooked until a forensic scientist noticed an item concealed within the right sock. A folded letter from a building society addressed to Mr. Regan, dated February 12, 2003, was discovered, proving that on the day he vanished, Amarjit Chauhan was indeed in Regan's residence. This last-ditch effort by Chauhan to leave behind a clue, presumably in anticipation of his looming demise, ultimately served as a pivotal piece of evidence for the police. Following a lengthy 9-month trial, the jury rendered a unanimous decision. Peter Reese was condemned to 23 years behind bars for the murder of Amarjit Emil Chauhan. Hornsey and Regan were each handed down 5 consecutive life terms for the slayings of the other members of the Chauhan family, ensuring their permanent confinement. The remains of Charanjit Kaur, Amarjit Chauhan's mother-in-law, were subsequently discovered off the Isle of Wight's coast. Yet the remains of the 2 young children, Devender, aged 1.5, and 2-month-old Ravender, were never recovered. The perpetration of such deeds against children is indicative of profound psychological aberration, typically in individuals unaware of the gravity of their actions. However, Kenneth Regan was found to be of sound mind. For him, these heinous acts were mere means to an end, as trivial as changing his attire. Consumed by greed and ambition, the loss of innocent lives was a price he was willing to pay without hesitation. Onkar Verma retreated to New Zealand, forever deprived of the opportunity to reunite with his nephews. His sole memory of them remained captured in a family video recorded merely 2 days prior to their vanishing, discovered in the deserted family home. This video stands as the last vestige of a once joyful and thriving family, a poignant reminder of what was lost.
What are the odds that the individual who recently walked past is in fact a habitual offender? And suppose, unwittingly, he is a wrongdoer, and you choose to engage with him, maybe inquire about the time or remark on the pleasantness of today's weather. In this scenario, do you believe your chances of survival are significant? What's your opinion? In 2016, the city of Anchorage, Alaska, was terrorized by a serial criminal. In just a few months, this villain took the lives of a total of 5 people. At first glance, there seemed to be nothing connecting the victims, nor were there any similarities between them. This fact only added to the residents' fear, making it seem as if everyone could potentially be in danger and easily become the next victim of a brutal attack by an unknown assailant. The police did everything in their power to determine who was responsible for these crimes. However, they were unable to find any concrete evidence, as all leads turned up nothing. This was the case until an event, completely unrelated to the horrific incidents, led officers directly to the criminal. To fully dive into today's story, let's go back about 7 years to the summer of 2016. Anchorage, the most populous city in Alaska, which acts as its de facto capital, houses roughly 300,000 residents. The narrative commenced on July 3, 2016, at 7:40 a.m., when a distress signal was sent to 911 by a woman on a bicycle ride. She disclosed that she had encountered two individuals deceased in the grass beside a path known as Ship Creek. From their attire, they appeared to be a young male and female, presumably dead due to the significant injuries on their skulls and the extensive blood pooled beneath them. The biker quickly deduced that a tragic event had befallen these individuals and swiftly contacted the emergency services. Regrettably, her suspicions were confirmed. Upon arrival, neither the emergency medical teams nor the police could alter the outcome. The victims were beyond help. They were assessed to have died shortly before their discovery, given their bodies retained warmth. Evidently, their demise was unnatural, resulting from violent assaults. Autopsies revealed the cause of death as gunshot wounds to the chest and head. The identities of the deceased, carrying their IDs, were soon confirmed by law enforcement to be 41-year-old Jason Netter and 20-year-old Brianna Foisey. Born in 1996 into a challenging family environment, Brianna and her older sister were soon placed in a shelter. Their luck changed when Marcella Foisey noticed them, choosing to offer the girls a nurturing and supportive home among other children. At 5 years old, Brianna was welcomed into a foster family. Early on, she was diagnosed with fetal alcohol syndrome, a result of prenatal alcohol exposure. Additionally, Brianna showed signs of attachment disorder, a condition characterized by a lack of emotional bond with caregivers, leading to trust issues, adaptation challenges, and difficulties in social interactions. This was further compounded by a learning disability diagnosis. Despite these hurdles, she was known as an energetic and outgoing young lady with a passion for music, particularly Broadway shows, and a talent for singing, often sharing her performances in short video clips. Yet, underneath her positive exterior and love for life, Brianna faced several struggles. Her adoptive mother, Marcella, revealed that Brianna's developmental issues hindered her ability to make wise choices, particularly regarding people and situations. This resulted in questionable friendships during her teenage years and an eventual drift into a problematic circle, culminating in a substance abuse issue with psychoactive drugs. Marcella attempted to guide her towards seeking assistance and rehabilitation, but after turning 18, Brianna was free to make her own choices, even those against her well-being. Choosing independence due to her reluctance to abide by household rules, she faced homelessness, lacking the financial means for housing. Despite these circumstances, she managed to stay in touch and maintain a close relationship with her mother, finding temporary refuge in homeless shelters. Jason Netter, the other individual who fell victim to the tragic incident, likewise lacked a stable living situation. Known for his kindness, humor, sociability, and willingness to assist others, he had a deep affection for nature and animals. Yet, akin to Brianna, Jason struggled with the misuse of psychoactive substances, which resulted in multiple legal issues. His unemployment further complicated his life, rendering him unable to provide child support for his two daughters. During the summer of 2016, he found temporary shelter in an Anchorage landfill, situated near the Ship Creek bike trail, where both he and Brianna would ultimately be discovered deceased. Despite their age disparity, Jason and Brianna formed a strong bond of friendship. Having experienced homelessness for an extended period, Netter became a protective figure for Brianna, particularly given her youthfulness. He endeavored to shield her from various dangers, a task at which, tragically, he did not succeed, as evidenced by their untimely deaths by gunshot on the trail's edge. Upon their arrival, the initial action taken by the police was to scrutinize the victims and the scene of the crime closely. They quickly observed the absence of shell casings near the deceased, leading them to deduce that the murderer might have employed a revolver, a firearm known for retaining its casings within the cylinder upon discharge. Additionally, a solitary bullet was discovered in proximity to where Jason and Brianna lay, indicating that the shooter had aimed at the pair but missed, with the projectile instead striking a wooden fence nearby. This bullet was seized as tangible evidence and forwarded for forensic examination. Subsequent analysis by specialists corroborated the hypothesis regarding the use of a revolver and even pinpointed the specific model of the firearm. It was identified as a Colt Python .357, a 6-shot revolver renowned for its exceptional trigger sensitivity and accuracy, marking it as a premier choice within its category. This particular model is relatively rare. While delving deeper into the investigation beyond the crime scene, detectives chose to interview the witness who had alerted the emergency services about the grim discovery. Her account added an eerie twist to the case. Her encounter with Brianna and Jason's bodies wasn't mere happenstance, but guided by an enigmatic stranger. She detailed to the authorities that on her morning bike ride across a bridge, a man nonchalantly informed her of the presence of 2 deceased individuals on the trail below, cautioning her to be mindful of her surroundings before continuing on his way. Motivated by the stranger's cryptic directions, she ventured down to the trail, where she stumbled upon the young victims and subsequently contacted emergency responders. The detectives were particularly intrigued by this unknown man. His behavior raised several red flags: his failure to report the bodies himself, his lack of urgency or distress over the discovery, and his eerily calm demeanor, as if he were cautioning against a minor inconvenience rather than a fatal tragedy. This odd encounter led the police to speculate that he might be connected to the murders of the 2 individuals experiencing homelessness. Regrettably, the witness was unable to offer a detailed description of the man, having focused more on the horrifying scene before her than on the person who directed her to it. She couldn't recall any specific features, attire, or identifying characteristics of the man. In pursuit of leads, the investigation team turned their attention to nearby surveillance footage, hoping that the mysterious individual might have been captured on camera. Although the trail itself lacked surveillance, cameras in the adjacent industrial area facing towards Ship Creek provided a potential source of evidence. Reviewing the footage from around the time of the emergency call, they spotted a man traversing the trail shortly before the discovery was reported. However, his direction of travel away from the camera obscured any chance of identifying his face. The footage only offered a vague impression of his appearance: blue pants or jeans, a possible hoodie or hat, a jacket, and a backpack, with his height being the only somewhat discernible trait. Despite this, the details were too limited to draw any definitive conclusions, prompting investigators to broaden their search for more substantial evidence. The footage capturing the enigmatic stranger was disseminated through various media outlets and presented to the public, with the hope that someone might identify him based on his attire or come forward to clarify his innocence as a mere bystander. The police's immediate objective was to ascertain his identity to eliminate him as a potential suspect. Despite this effort, the individual in question did not step forward, and although the police received multiple tips about his possible identity, none led to a conclusive breakthrough, and inquiries into his involvement eventually reached an impasse. In parallel, investigators delved into the backgrounds of Brianna and Jason, engaging with their acquaintances and relatives to uncover any possible motives for their murder. They explored numerous angles: debts owed to drug dealers, disputes with other individuals experiencing homelessness over territory, or the possibility of being unintended casualties of a gang conflict. Despite extensive speculation, no concrete evidence emerged to support these theories. Ultimately, the investigation suggested that Jason and Brianna were not specifically targeted. It appeared they were merely victims of circumstance, tragically killed for being in the wrong place at the wrong time by someone with unknown motives. This chilling realization underscored the unpredictable danger lurking within the community, hinting at the possibility of a repeat offender capable of striking randomly. The subsequent incident less than a month after the tragic discovery of Jason Netter and Brianna Fuzzi only intensified these fears. On the morning of July 29, 2016, a 21-year-old man named Travion Kendall Thompson, affectionately called Trey by those close to him, became the latest victim of a seemingly similar violent act. Trey was known for his intelligence, kindness, and readiness to assist those in need, often going as far as bringing homeless individuals to his home for meals. On that fateful early morning, he was en route to his aunt's residence in East Anchorage on his bicycle, intending to feed her dog in her absence. Tragically, he was nearly at his destination when he was fatally shot by an unidentified assailant. Responding officers discovered Trey's body on the street, with gunshot wounds to his head and torso, and notably, like the previous case, no shell casings were found at the scene. However, in a potentially pivotal development, police identified a surveillance camera with a direct view of the location where Trey met his untimely demise. This devastating sequence of events, captured around 3 a.m. by a surveillance camera, unfolded with chilling precision. A man was recorded walking with eerie calmness down the street before abruptly raising his hand, drawing a pistol, and firing directly at Travion Kendall Thompson. Fatefully, this camera, located on Trey's aunt's property, where he was headed to perform a simple act of kindness, captured the grim scene mere meters from her doorstep. Remarkably, just weeks prior, Trey had fixed this very surveillance system that would tragically document his own fatal encounter. After Trey collapsed, the footage showed the assailant casually approaching, stowing the pistol in his pocket, commandeering Trey's bicycle, and then riding off into the night. Yet, the surveillance video wasn't the sole piece of evidence gathered. The incident had eyewitnesses. 2 teenage girls who were up late, engrossed in sharing frightening tales by the window of a nearby home. They first became unnerved upon noticing a tall figure loitering by a fire hydrant, seemingly out of place in the dead of night. Their attention then shifted to another figure further down the street, Trey, just before the fatal shots rang out. After momentarily averting their gaze, they looked back to witness the tragic aftermath. Trey, lying motionless on the ground, and the assailant making a slow escape on the bicycle past their vantage point. These observant teenagers provided detectives with a detailed description of the shooter. An older man with shoulder-length wavy hair, wearing heavy boots, a cap, and a camouflage jacket, noted especially for his tall stature. The meticulous analysis of the surveillance footage allowed experts to approximate the shooter's height as around 6'2", or possibly even taller. With the detailed account from the teenage witnesses, a composite sketch of the suspect was crafted and subsequently disseminated to the public, alongside a photograph of Thompson's stolen bicycle. The police urged the community to remain alert and vigilant. The connection between Trey's murder and the earlier killings on the Ship Creek Trail was quickly made by investigators, further deepening the mystery as Trey, like Brianna and Jason, had no apparent enemies or known reasons to be targeted, suggesting the chilling possibility of random acts of violence. A forensic investigation conclusively linked the murders through the use of the same weapon, confirming the presence of a serial offender within Anchorage. As the case unfolded, the public's response to the composite sketch generated a flood of tips and leads. Among those contributing to the investigation was Trey's mother, Mendy Primo, driven by a profound sense of loss and a determination to find her son's killer. Refusing to remain passive, Mendy actively engaged with the community, sharing the sketch and seeking information that might lead to the assailant. Her efforts led her to a pivotal observation. She spotted an individual on a bicycle identical to the one taken from Trey on the night of his murder. The man was seen heading towards a known homeless encampment, a secluded area where individuals without stable housing constructed temporary shelters. Recognizing the potential significance of her discovery, Mendy wasted no time in notifying the authorities, hoping her proactive measures might finally bring about a breakthrough in the harrowing investigation. Patrol units were sent to the encampment where they indeed located the bike and confiscated it for further analysis. Yet, that wasn't everything. Close to the tree where the bike was positioned, inside a cavity, they unearthed a firearm. After conversing with the inhabitants of the encampment, the officers swiftly determined the ownership of both items. The individual possessing the bike and the handgun was taken to the police department for interrogation. Nonetheless, as the detectives continued their conversation with the vagrant, increasing skepticism emerged regarding whether they had detained the correct individual. It was revealed that he was an ex-officer who had previously served in the New York Police Department. Police forces receive specialized training in which they are instructed to fire using both hands, while the suspect caught on surveillance footage wielded the handgun single-handedly. Consequently, it appeared improbable that the man from the encampment was linked to the criminal acts. The handgun discovered within the tree cavity was also identified as being a different model, not the Colt Python 357 implicated in the 3 prior deadly occurrences. Upon detailed examination, the bike was also determined to bear only a slight resemblance to the one taken from Trey. As a result, the vagrant was excluded as a suspect, extinguishing the brief glimmer of hope. Exactly 1 month following the sorrowful demise of Trey, the Anchorage police were alerted to yet another pair of murders in the identical vicinity. In the dead of night on August 28, 2016, a woman traversing Moon Valley Park dialed 911 upon finding the cadaver of a young male, later recognized as 34-year-old Kevin Turner. Similar to Brianna and Jason, Kevin was without a home. Tragically, this young man was battling schizophrenia and bipolar disorder. He had been in search of a facility focusing on mental health care, but failed to locate one that met his requirements. And now, his existence had been cut short.
Kevin was discovered seated on a picnic bench in the park, his head laying on the table, clutching socks in his hands. His footwear was removed and positioned beside him, indicating he might have been assaulted while trying to wear his socks. It appears he didn't notice the assailant, as there was no sign he attempted to shelter from the gunfire. The authorities also found a second casualty in the park, later recognized as 25-year-old Brian DeHassan, a local advocate for the environment. He was on a nocturnal bicycle excursion and was located not far from where Kevin Turner lay. Despite there being no direct link between the two, shell casings were missing from the scene, akin to the previous incidents. The projectiles that claimed the lives of Bryant and Kevin were discharged from the identical firearm, a 6-shot Colt Python .357. Detectives promptly surmised that the same perpetrator was behind these assaults, elevating his total number of victims to 5. Nonetheless, the police were still at a standstill in tracking down this individual. His identity remained a mystery.
Following the third incident, the Anchorage police issued a warning to residents about the presence of a serial offender at large, urging them to exercise caution and avoid public parks and cycling paths, particularly during nighttime hours. The attacker was indiscriminate in his selection of victims, showing no particular preference or targeting a specific demographic, making the potential for anyone to be next. The community was engulfed in fear after this advisory. However, alongside the warning, the authorities announced a $10,000 incentive for information that could lead to the capture of the assailant. Despite receiving numerous tips and leads, progress in the investigation stalled. The situation took a dramatic turn in November 2016 when an entirely separate incident inadvertently guided investigators to a suspect. The way this breakthrough unfolded was astonishing. In the early hours of November 12, 2016, around 4:30 a.m., Anchorage Police Department's officer Arn Salau was patrolling downtown when he received a dispatch about a nearby crime. A taxi driver had reported a passenger who evaded fare payment and escaped from his cab. Close to the scene, Salau opted to search the vicinity for the fare evader. With the pre-dawn streets nearly deserted, he spotted a man walking on the sidewalk. Salau aimed to inquire if the man had noticed any unusual activity and called out from his vehicle, requesting the pedestrian to halt. The individual, however, disregarded Salau's command and continued on his path, an event captured by the patrol car's dash cam. Despite repeated orders, the man did not stop. Salau then escalated his efforts, using the car's loudspeaker to issue his command. Eventually, the man turned and walked towards Salau's vehicle, but, rather than conversing, abruptly attacked, drawing a handgun from his clothing and firing at the officer. Salau exited his vehicle and engaged, returning fire. Sergeant Mark Patske, who was in the vicinity, intervened to assist his fellow officer, firing at the assailant. Officer Salau was struck 4 times, sustaining significant injuries to his bones, liver, and intestines from the gunfire. Despite the critical wounds, Salau survived the ordeal. He was swiftly transported to a hospital where he underwent a critical 7-hour surgery. The perpetrator suffered a fatal gunshot wound to the skull and was pronounced dead on the spot. It was only after his demise that the detectives probing a spree of offenses in Anchorage in recent times were able to link this individual to the prime suspect. They examined the gunfight video from the dashboard camera of a police vehicle and cross-referenced it with footage from other cameras during prior events. This unknown man fit the profile of the serial offender. He donned a hat with a bill and a camouflaged coat, stood exceptionally tall, and fired using just one hand. Yet, there was an additional piece of evidence. The firearm wielded by the assailant was confirmed to be a 6-round Colt Python .357, the same weapon connected to all 5 lethal incidents. The gunman was identified as James Dale Ritchie. So, who was this individual? James Dale Ritchie was born on November 4, 1976, in Anchorage, Alaska. Throughout high school, he was notable not just for his stature, but also for his exceptional intelligence. Ritchie excelled in athletics, participating in both football and basketball, showing the capacity to pursue a professional sports career like 2 of his teammates. His talent caught the attention of West Virginia University's football team, leading to his recruitment following his 1994 graduation. However, Ritchie's life trajectory diverged significantly from what his peers anticipated. He enrolled at the university for 1 semester before withdrawing to follow an entirely different course. Upon returning to Anchorage, Richie's life began to decline. He developed an addiction to illicit drugs, engaged in theft, drug trafficking, and dogfighting. Richie faced multiple arrests, and in 2005, he was convicted for burglary and an attempted abduction with the use of zip ties and 2 handguns. After a 2-year incarceration, James went back to Anchorage, where he is believed to have obtained his Colt Python revolver. In 2013, Richie relocated to his parents' home in the quaint Virginia town of Broadway. Even his mother expressed fear of him, describing him as a potential danger. She was convinced that her son's fate was either a lifetime in prison or a violent death. Despite these ominous predictions, Richie appeared to seek a change. He started to prepare for an associate's degree at a nearby college and attended classes. James was reportedly amiable to his neighbors, began relationships, and even experienced love. Nevertheless, Richie's later choices led him to a grim series of violent offenses, culminating in his death during an encounter with law enforcement. Richie seemed to be realigning his life, yet this phase was short-lived. His romantic relationship concluded in a manner far removed from what he had hoped, causing deep distress for both individuals involved. Struggling to manage his feelings, Richie made his way back to Anchorage in March 2016. He even pursued mental health support and took antidepressants for a period. Law enforcement was unable to confirm if Richie had been formally diagnosed with any psychiatric condition, but indications suggest he might have genuinely struggled with schizophrenia. Following his passing, a former housemate disclosed that James Dale Richie frequently uttered bizarre claims, like possessing the power to alter weather conditions, sincerely believing he could summon rain or bring out the sun. He also harbored beliefs about his ability to dictate life and death, choosing who would survive and who would perish. Even posthumously, James Dale Richie was identified as the primary suspect in multiple shootings, though detectives lacked concrete evidence to conclusively link him to the crimes. The similarities in physical description and the identical firearm used in all 5 cases provided a strong basis for suspicion. The challenge now lay in compiling additional proof to provide fresh assurances to the public. In the course of searching Richie's residence, law enforcement officials found 18 shell casings concealed in his closet, precisely matching the count of rounds discharged from the revolver in all 5 incidents. Ballistic analysis confirmed that the firearm belonging to Richie was responsible for the fatalities of the victims. This proof was deemed sufficient to officially declare in April 2017 that James Dale Richie was the assailant behind the serial offenses that had cast a shadow of terror over Anchorage for months. Regrettably, this revelation did little to comfort the victims' families, who would have preferred for the culprit to be apprehended, tried, and sentenced to life imprisonment. The rationale behind Richie's lethal actions against these 5 persons remains elusive and is probably destined to stay unresolved. An intriguing detail surfaced that may or may not bear relevance to the case. In his youth, James had been close to the father of Trey Thompson, Bobby Thompson. This long-standing friendship persisted, and at the time of his son Trey's murder, Bobby was incarcerated for offenses involving illicit drugs and firearms. This element prompts speculation on whether Richie was aware of his target that fateful night, and if the memory of his friend crossed his mind. Evidently devoid of any remorse, Richie perpetuated his criminal spree. His apprehension was fortuitous, suggesting that if not for that incidental encounter, the tally of his victims could have exceeded 5.